My name is Ihron Rensburg, the former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, current Ombud for the University of Cape Town, Life Fellow, Visiting Professor and Senior Advisor to the Principal at King's College in London, where I presently am Honorary Professor at Nelson Mandela University and Senior Associate of South Africa's Higher Education, Leadership and Management Program, or HELM as we know it. On behalf of our host HELM, a program of University of South Africa, extends a very warm welcome to each one of our speakers, panelists, participants, and organizers who are joining us from across our planet. We are most grateful that you've been able to find the time to join us, and we look forward to hosting you over the next 3 days as we engage personal, collective, and institutional learning, disruption, synthesis, growth, and development. Allow me to extend a very special and warm welcome to my co-host for the opening session, Dr. Oliver Seal, the Director at HELM. Allow me also to extend a warm welcome to our summit co-host and colleagues from the Council of Arts and Sciences, or CAS, the National Association of Deans of the Arts and Sciences in the United States of America. Last and importantly, allow me to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Marsia Socikwa, as well as to Mandi Sakakwa, both colleagues from the Department of Higher Education and Training here in South Africa. The support of the department is essential, as it is instrumental in enabling HELM to undertake its important university's management and leadership development programs, including the hosting of this important summit. And so, colleagues, over the course of the next 3 days, we will engage in dialogue on the important theme, leading organizational change for sustainability and development in higher education. And I ask that we keep this top of mind as we make our way through the summit program. As our summit outline reminds us, and I quote, the conflicts across the globe, including in Ukraine and Syria, and in many other parts of the world, highlight our shared vulnerability, heightened uncertainties, and how highly interconnected we are as societies, economically, socially, and politically and culturally. The ways in which the geopolitical context is framed shapes sustainability, development, and change. And higher education is impacted by these changes in terms of its core mission, financial sustainability, and economic and social relevance. This complex changing context raises several leading questions. For example, how do we locate higher education and its leadership to advance sustainability and development? How can higher education leadership enhance its collaborative efforts for national, global change and stability? What leadership frameworks can guide our thinking? And how can we as higher education leaders monitor and evaluate our contributions? And in this light, the sub-themes that we will be exploring over the course of the next 3 days are what has changed in global and regional contexts that require a rethinking of the meaning and practice of leadership in higher education. Secondly, what is required in relationship to leadership development that will allow for complexity thinking, agile and nimble capacity for change, and for innovation and fresh thinking? And thirdly and finally, what is the organizational setting, or are the organizational settings in relation to, for example, collaboration, partnership, and innovation required for organizations to thrive towards sustainable change and development? And so, colleagues and friends, kindly note that your questions and comments are most welcome. Indeed, they are an important part of our deliberations. Kindly post these in the chat box, and our virtual hosts will communicate these to the session hosts. Should you wish any one of the panelists to comment specifically or to respond to a question, kindly indicate whose further insights you wish to have. And so, colleagues and friends, allow me now to hand over the reins to Dr. Oliver Seal, the Director of HELM, who is our co-host for this opening session. Oliver, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rensburg, for those warm remarks, and a huge welcome to all of you from across the globe. It's really indeed a first for us here at HELM to host an international summit, and a summit that includes a partnership with our co-host, the Council Colleges of Arts and Sciences in the US, and other partners, in particular, Department of Higher Education and Training. So it's good to have you here. I'm here really just to introduce our CEO, Dr. Phethiwe Matutu, who has joined us. She will provide some opening remarks. So let me, without further ado, say thank you to all of you for joining us. Thank you for making the time in a very difficult period of our universities at this point. And thank you for investing in us, in yourselves, in the next 3 days. I'm sure we're going to have a very dynamic and exciting event with multiple voices from different contexts and settings, and that's really going to be very exciting. So let me hand you over to Dr. Phethiwe Matutu, who is the CEO of Universities South Africa. Dr. Matutu, over to you. Thank you.
My sincere apologies for coming in this late. I was traveling. I assume that that has been explained already. To the Deputy Director General, Marsia Socikwa, the Chairperson of the USAf Board, Professor Muthwa, the leaders in higher education globally and locally, the conference organizing team, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Universities South Africa, I'm delighted to welcome you in the Higher Education Leadership Management Summit. The higher education sector's role is to ensure improved economic participation and social development of our youth and adults, to produce and exploit knowledge for economic and societal benefit. And of course, because of the societal benefit component of it, that means a very strong engagement and immersion within society. The HELM program is a Department of Higher Education and Training funded initiative undertaken through Universities South Africa. The discussions at this summit take place against the backdrop of 2 recent higher education leadership conferences hosted by HELM and Universities South Africa Forum in 2020 and 2021 respectively. In 2020, the first Higher Education Leadership and Management virtual conference took place entitled Leading and Managing the University in Africa for Disruption, Complexity and Change. In 2021, the University South Africa Forum Conference focused on the engaged university. This 2022 HELM Virtual Summit aims to build on these conversations with a special focus on leadership development for the sector. We all know how important leadership is in order to achieve our goals and for institutions to be quite sustainable and at the same time to live their missions and their vision. So the summit focuses on drawing from the challenges as discussed within the context of disruption, complexity, and change, and the engaged university by reviewing what this means for developing leadership for sustainability and change. So you can see, ladies and gentlemen, that this summit is about being practical in terms of the kind of leadership that is required in order to achieve what was envisaged, what was discussed in the previous two conferences and summits that were hosted. In this way, the summit will consider practical implications for what is required from leadership within the current context. And we have quite a number of summit objectives that I would like to mention to create a platform for leadership critical engagement, to critically engage on leadership development within diverse organizational settings, to critically engage with the pressing challenges facing universities globally and in South Africa, to critically engage with probably change solution to these challenges, to build powerful new networks globally and within the global south. And we are expecting about 500 participants, and the invitations are for the leaders in higher education globally, within the continent and locally, as you can see in your programs. We are targeting managers, leaders, higher education, executive leadership, deans, heads of schools, and executives across professional support services, as in areas such as student support, human resources, and finance. So it is important then for us as participants of this conference to come up with the solutions that we are envisaging for the kind of leadership that is required within the specific context of higher education, locally, continentally, and globally. On those words, few words, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you again and also open this conference, wishing you well as we proceed with this conference over the next 3 days. You've got a very rich program that we are all very much interested in participating in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matutu, for those inspiring words. And we're so happy you could join us just in the nick of time. So good to hear from you. And thank you for setting the tone for our HELM Summit over the next 3 days. Colleagues, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker from the Department of Higher Education and Training, Dr. Marsia. She is a graduate from University of Witwatersrand, from City University and Sterling University. She currently serves as a member of the SABC board and is the Deputy Director General of University Education at the Department of Higher Education and Training. She has worked with international institutions, including USAID and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, as well as the International Telecommunications Union. Dr. Socikwa has served in the telecommunications sector for over 20 years in multiple capacities, including as an executive, an academic, a consultant, and a regulator. She's worked in the higher education sector in multiple senior roles. She's a recipient of the Chevening Scholarship, member of the Institute of Directors of Africa, and is a strong proponent of good governance, data analytics, future thinking, and social justice. Dr. Socikwa is one of the founding members of NETAL at Africa, which trains several telecommunications regulators on the continent. It's our honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Socikwa, who's going to deliver for us the keynote address. Over to you.
Good afternoon, and I must just say my small apologies. I'm in a place not typically characterized as my office. We just had a workshop with our minister, and so I decided to continue from there. Let me start off by saying thank you for the generous introduction, Dr. Oliver Steele. Yes, it is quite it is quite humbling when you're introduced with such kindness. Thank you very much. Let me start off by thanking you for this opportunity and yes, inviting me to what I think is a very timely conversation in the sector, leadership. Dr. Phethiwe Matutu, CEO of Universities of South Africa, Vice-Chancellors, Deputy Vice-Chancellors, Deans, Heads of Schools and Academic Departments, esteemed international guests and speakers, CEOs and officials from private higher education institutions and other organizations represented here today, officials from the Department of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, and other government departments present today, academics and administration professionals, University South Africa management team, ladies and gentlemen. It does really give me a great pleasure to open the Higher Education Leadership and Management Summit to be held under the theme, Leading Organizational Change for Sustainability and Development in Higher Education. The theme of the conference is relevant, and it's relevant to those in higher education wishing to grapple with the transformational and sustainability challenges facing not only the post-school education and training system, but arguably our wider society. As continuous uncertainty characterizes our world globally, we are experiencing its effects on our well-being and socioeconomic inequalities, as well as the mutations of the COVID-19 virus and pandemics, which remains in our midst. We do so against the backdrop of already compounding global challenges, for example, climate change, poverty and hunger, gender inequality, health and well-being, matters around clean water and sanitation. Ladies and gentlemen, let us not forget that we are still seized with the fallout of combating the malvalent effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, with our universities globally at the forefront of the struggle to achieve solutions. But the COVID-19 crisis is also connected to a wider set of crises, of social inequality, of technological disruption, and of course, crisis of the global capitalist system. Of course, some would not want to describe it that way. Some would like to say it's a crisis of West versus East. Add to this wars and ongoing violent conflicts. Clearly, we are feeling very vulnerable. We are in the midst of heightened uncertainties, and we realize increasingly that we are extremely interconnected as societies, economically, socially, and politically. The ways in which global geopolitical context is framed and who is focused on shapes and developments and change, higher education is impacted by all these changes, and we cannot escape it. There is no doubt that during the past 2 decades, the world of higher education has changed dramatically. And this environment has had significant implications for university governance, leadership, and management. South African higher education is in transition and grappling with major challenges arising from all the interlinked, interconnected problems and opportunities, and in some instances, development imperatives. Traditional methods of governance, leadership, and management as applied in universities have been surpassed by corporate-like approaches, characterized by conformity requirements and measures. So too, the increasingly vociferous demands from students and other stakeholders for more democratized forms of governance, leadership, and decision-making in local universities. Increasingly, leaders and management in our institutions are confronted by voices they have and tones they have not confronted before. Even more so here, where balancing global and unique local environmental drivers are key for survival and success. Some writers suggest that the higher education sector has a leadership crisis and requires a new kind of leadership and management that is attuned to transformation, pluralism on one hand, and performity and efficiency on the other. I'd like to add empathy. Yes, empathy in the mix of all of this. In South Africa, the notion of university leadership has only recently expanded to a broader understanding that includes head of academic departments, head of academic schools, deans, deputies, as well as administrative leadership, registrars, faculty managers. Their need for structural and systematic training development programs is acute today as it was yesterday. And this applies both in the academy and administration of universities. It is for these reasons of advancing management that the Department of Higher Education and Training partnered with the University of South Africa to develop and implement its higher education leadership and management program, in short, HELM. I must say I was initially confused. Why would you use an acronym HELM? But increasingly with my short stay in the department, let me say 6 months thus far, I now fully appreciate its importance, particularly given the number of administrative actions we've had to institute in this financial year alone. So ladies and gentlemen, although HELM has been in existence since 2002, it achieved a focused strategic direction in 2017 with financial support through the University Capacity Development Program, UCDP, and input from the Department of Higher Education and Training in partnership with the University of South Africa. Reconfigured in 2018, HELM offers valuable perspectives on the contemporary leadership and management context, complexities, and challenges facing universities. The need has never been greater for HELM to provide all levels of university leadership and management with skills. And I call them survival skills, survival strategies, and insight into this ever-shifting terrain. HELM's mission is to explore and create relevant and cutting-edge solutions that build organizational and individual capacity needs in universities. The overarching objective is to ensure that the higher education system is endowed with leaders and managers able to drive the institution towards a transformed future in this challenging environment. It is evident that the successful partnership between the DHET and HELM has already resulted in some exciting outcomes, such as the pilot in Women in Leadership program, which was launched in September 2020, and now in its third cohort of 35 participants from 21 universities. Another new development on the horizon is the University Lecturer Development Program, ULDP in short, that HELM is designing and will implement with financial support from the ETDP CETA in 2023. There is no doubt that HELM will grow from strength to strength only with your support. And now to the business of the day, the HELM Summit. The ways in which the global geopolitical context is framed and who is focused on shapes development and change. Higher education is impacted by these changes, whether financially or in relation to mobility and internationalization of its campuses. This context of unrelenting instability and uncertainty raises several questions for higher education leaders, but I also hope several opportunities. Let's start with the questions. How do we locate higher education and its leadership to advance sustainability as well as development? How can higher education leadership enhance its collaborative efforts for national, global change and stability? What frameworks can guide our thinking? Do they need revision? How can we as higher education leaders monitor and evaluate our contributions? What frameworks do we have for introspection? I wonder. I think these same questions offer great and multiple opportunities, not only for reflection, but for change and a more responsive system. The summit takes place against the backdrop of 2 recent higher education leadership conferences hosted by Higher Education Leaders and Management and University South Africa Forum in 2020 and in 2021. In 2020, the first HELM virtual conference took place, and it was entitled Leading and Managing the University in Africa for Disruption, Complexity and Change. And in 2021, the University South Africa Forum conference focused on engaged universities. This HELM Summit aims to build on these conversations with a special focus on leadership development for the sector. The summit focuses on drawing from the challenges as discussed within the context of disruption, of complexity, of change, and the engaged university, by reviewing what this means for developing leadership for sustainability and change. In this way, the summit will consider the practical implications for what is required from leadership within the current context. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, the following constitute the sub-themes of the summit. What has changed in the global and regional context that requires a rethinking of leadership in higher education? What is required in relation to leadership development that will allow for complexity, agility, nimble capacity for change, for innovation, for fresh out-of-the-box thinking? I like to frame it for lateral thinking, and more of it. What is the organizational settings in relation to, for example, collaboration, partnership, and innovation required for organizations to strive towards sustainable change and development? And no doubt, ladies and gentlemen, collaboration is needed now more than ever. None of us can do it on our own. And the more and sooner leaders acknowledge that, the better for all of us. The summit will not only stimulate your thinking around these questions, but equally and importantly will provide a compass, I hope, and a guide to engaging with views and perspectives. Multiple views, no doubt. What might I, for example, be assuming is correct? How do I consider my own thinking in these issues, and what might I need to reconsider? I mentioned introspection earlier. How can I, as a leader, collaborate with civil society, government, other stakeholders, communities far and near, and build a better education system for my country? And what should this system look like? And hereby, perhaps you and I, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, can begin together a creative journey towards new solutions and possibilities for global and a South African higher education. I wish to thank all of you for attending the HELM Summit, especially during these challenging times. It is a great pity that I could not be there in person. I certainly would have wanted to, and I know so would our Director General, Dr. Sishi, and our Minister, Dr. Bladen Zimande. Thank you, colleagues, to all our esteemed international and local hosts, facilitators, and speakers who generously offered to contribute and share their knowledge and perspectives in these various sessions. Thank you. The outcomes of this summit need to shape a workable and exciting set of priorities that HELM, together with the Department of Higher Education and Training, can use to forge a stronger future for the higher education sector. In closing, I believe that our leadership journeys in our universities have their genesis in life, are inspired by intellectual pursuits, interweaving experience and application of theory and praxis. It is most aptly described by Lewis, who says that knowing begins and ends in experience, but it does not end in the experience in which it began. I hope that this is your experience at this HELM Summit. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Socikwa, and of course, a round of applause for those inspiring words on behalf of the DG and the Minister of Higher Education and Training. We really appreciate the contribution. We value the partnership that we've built over a number of years with the Department of Higher Education and Training. I think it's an example of how the university sector can work hand in glove with government and other stakeholders to advance the needs of leadership and management development, not just in South Africa, but at some point also in our region. Thank you very much for your time. Please pass on our best regards to the Minister and to the DG, and we look forward to your colleagues' continued participation in our summit. Let me hand back to Professor Ihron Rensburg, who will introduce us to the next session. Thank you very much. Over to you, Professor Rensburg.
Thank you very much, Oliver, Dr. Socikwa, Dr. Matutu, for sharing your insights in a very thoughtful manner, reflective manner at this opening session, and for providing us with food and fruit for thought as we continue our dialogue and conversation. So welcome back, colleagues and friends, to our next session, in which we explore and reflect upon the regional and global trends that are shaping higher education institutions and systems. So today we're looking for important insights that will help us make sense of the current period that we find ourselves within, a period of great danger, of challenge and of opportunity, and of the importance of learning and adaptation. For this session, we have 4 brief but incisive and successive inputs to be shared shortly via video from 4 eminent and distinguished and successful university leaders. Firstly, we will have Professor Ahmed Bawa, a theoretical physicist, the immediate past CEO of USAf, and a leader and manager with a rich and diverse history in the university sector, including as Vice-Chancellor at Durban University of Technology and as Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Natal and at its successor, the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Then will be followed Dr. Minu, the Managing Director and Vice Chair of the University Design Institute at Arizona State University, where she brings her expertise in organizational design, leadership, and culture to partner with higher education leaders to co-design solutions that enable universities to be more relevant, successful, and sustainable. Thirdly, we will learn some insights from Professor Hans de Wit, recipient of the Noam Chomsky Lifetime Achievement Award in 2021, and a distinguished fellow at the Center for International Higher Education. His focus is the study of higher education internationalization, and he was previously the director of the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College. Fourthly, we are joined by Professor Sibongile Muthwa, the chair of USAf, the Vice-Chancellor of Nelson Mandela University, and who herself has a distinguished career in development, as well as in the public sector and in academia. And colleagues and friends, before we share the video with the insights from these 4 leaders, allow me first, though, to share with you the insights of Professor Odora Catherine Hoppers. She is extraordinary professor at the University of South Africa where she held the South African Research Chair in Development Education. She's a scholar and policy specialist in international development, education, disarmament, peace and human security, and is an expert with UNESCO, the UN Department of Disarmament Affairs, the World Economic Forum, and the World Intellectual Property Organization. She's currently based at the University of Gulu in Uganda. Allow me then to read on her behalf her contributions on this topic, trends in global and regional context of universities, with the underlying question being, what is the current state of higher education? And so Professor Hoppers begins by observing that her inputs, quote, focuses on higher education itself, unquote. And she then goes on to observe that the present higher education and the academic architecture which underpins it is borrowed, not grounded. Otherwise, she says, we would be thirsty, hungry for our sciences, our philosophies, our values, which should underpin every learning agenda. She continues that it has got no multifaceted ethics of living, only silos marked by discipline. It is stuck in only one way of seeing and living, the Western one, which hierarchizes happily and gladly. She continues that multi and transdisciplinarity brings us to a change of mindset. It raises questions about leadership in context, engages with existing practices in order to better diagnose past and ongoing blockages, and makes bold propositions about the future. It encourages change of attitude towards knowledge itself, towards the very tools of cognition we have used to define our reality. She continues that, meanwhile, it is true that the post-Galilean development of human thought remains largely a product of the West, especially of Europe, and has also represented tremendous advances in our understanding of nature and society. The knowledge production enterprise, which emanates from this epistemological position, leaves out many areas of inquiry, she says, which have been considered relevant to the development in non-Western societies, including the monopoly control over concepts, practices, and images. She continues that most disciplines are stuck with encoded discourses and practices which fail to explain social changes that are taking place in African society. For instance, she says, in South Africa, as a result of the transition from apartheid to democracy, if her memory serves her, she says, correctly, it was hoped that the transition from apartheid to democracy needed to help or boost higher education and the academy in general to raise new questions, new possibilities, to regard old problems from a new angle, and to spark creative imagination, and marking real advance in science, philosophy, and so on. She continues, it would facilitate the re-examination of ideas, of norms, and practices in the academe in its relationship to African society. She observes that this conference of ours is worded in this way. To her, the spark did not happen enough. And in conclusion, she says, once more, we need a conceptualization of science and philosophy and cultural common sense that helps uncover and contest the multiple layers of sedimented assumptions about Africa and concepts that underpin and quote-unquote naturalizes our 21st century contemporary thinking in the academe. That then concludes the remarks of Professor Hoppers. I now turn to Ms. Cindy Kai, who will share with us the video, giving us the insights from the 4 other panelists. Over to you, Sunil.
Hello. It gives me such great pleasure to say these few words at this HELM event. And I'm currently in Tokyo at what is called Tokyo College at the University of Tokyo. And it's so nice to be able to connect with you while I'm in Tokyo. So I've been asked to say a few things about the large kind of pressures, the large challenges, the large shifts in environment, if you like, that faces higher education globally. And I've got sort of 5 or 6 kind of items just to list, if you like, and each one, of course, requires enormous, interrogation, coming to grips with, understanding the implications of, and so on. So I'm just going to go through them, and then what we'll do is I'll summarize with a few suggestions, if you like. The first one is clearly a major problem around the world now, which is kind of the shifting boundary conditions of truth. I don't mean truth with a capital T, it's truth with a little t. And what I mean by that, of course, is that universities are in the business of producing experts, producing knowledge and information, producing policy advice, and so on. So, if the boundary conditions for truth is shifting, and this is largely due to growth in anti-intellectualism, growth in populism, wherein people choose, what they want to kind of believe in, and so on. This has enormous implications for the way in which universities function, for the way in which universities think of themselves, for the way in which universities consider the way in which they relate to society more broadly, and so on. So that is my first point, just this idea that there are shifting boundary conditions for truth. And that's something that I think we have to concentrate on if we are thinking about the future of universities. The second one are the large geopolitical shifts that are taking place. And what I mean by that is that there was a moment in time with the falling of with the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Iron Curtain, if you like, and so on, that we saw sort of an impetus towards sort of a global approach to higher education. That, of course, has been reversed enormously with a number of tensions around the world that have emerged. And those tensions really threaten this kind of global project of universities. The project of universities has to be the development of a kind of global commons of knowledge and of scholars and scholarship and so on. And of course, the reason for that is because so many of the grand challenges that face humanity are global and local in nature. And therefore, the need for us to work towards building a global commons of scholars and scholarship is so critical. And therefore, we have to pay attention to the impact of this fracturing that is taking place around the world. And almost every day now in the news, you hear of universities that are shutting doors to certain people. We hear about scholars being arrested, put into prison because they are deemed to be agents of enemy states and so on. So just this idea of the shifting geopolitical conditions. And by the way, one of those conditions is also the shift in what you might think of as the geopolitics of knowledge, right? Which is the fact that a few years ago, much of the knowledge production in the world, if one asked, what is the center of gravity of the world's kind of knowledge enterprise, it would have been quite easy to say that it's somewhere in the mid-North Atlantic, if you like. Well, that has shifted dramatically now, of course, with the rise of the knowledge enterprise and the research outputs and so on in Asia, and that has really shifted the geopolitics of nature, and universities have to take that into account as well. The third one is the obvious one, of course, which is the impact of this technology moment we are in on higher education and its impact on teaching, of course, which we saw during COVID-19, and we continue to see the impact of the technology moment on research, which we are also witnessing with galloping at remarkable pace, really. And I don't have the time to go into any of the details, but just to say that that the nature of research is changing, the nature of the production of knowledge is changing, and therefore this has enormous implications for the future of universities, and perhaps more importantly, the importance of this technology moment for administration of universities. That too is changing at a rapid pace. Of course, we can't ignore the fact that there are such huge challenges facing universities in the global south in particular about freeing themselves from the dominance, if you like, of the paradigms and the knowledge projects and so on that are shaped in the global north, and that the project of decolonization has to be seen not so much as a kind of as an endpoint, if you like, but has to be seen as process. The idea that actually the process of producing knowledge of our contexts really kind of then provides us with the impetus to begin to analyze what it means for universities in the global south to decolonize, to shift towards new approaches to knowledge production and so on. So, and of course, one of the most important aspects of this is getting our universities to encounter the other knowledge systems that exist in the world, but also in our contexts. So creating the environment for different knowledge systems to interact with each other. This is also a social justice issue, because during the process of colonization and during apartheid, in the South African context at least, what we did see was the enormous pressure on knowledge systems that we might think of as indigenous knowledge systems, and the extent to which these knowledge systems were suppressed. And therefore, there's an incredible imperative now of our universities, for our universities, to resurface these knowledge systems and to get them to intersect with the knowledge systems that are dominant in the university system. And I think that, when one thinks about all of these, we have to think quite clearly also about the impact of the large kind of social movements now that are occurring both locally and globally. So at the global level, just the Me Too movement, of course, the huge movement for climate justice and for climate reform, for us to tackle sort of global warming, and then thirdly, of course, it's the social movement for racial justice, and these have to be brought into reckoning, if you like. That we have to actually deal with these in the most effective way that we can. And to understand what their impact on universities. Of course, all of these lead to great complexity for the future of universities, and therefore there's a need for us also to understand how to manage complexity, how to deal with complexity, how to ensure that the structure, the form and structure of our universities are able to deal with these large challenges that we face. And it seems to me, at least, that the most important point that came out of fees must fall, roads must fall, and came out of the pandemic, is just the idea that universities have to foreground social justice as they think about their future role in society. Thank you so much, and I hope very much that this was useful to you. And it's a pleasure again, Oliver. It's a pleasure again to be involved in HELM's work. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Minu. I'm the Managing Director and Vice Chair of the University Design Institute at Arizona State University. I'd like to share 5 challenges and issues and 5 opportunities for global higher education. Challenge number 1 is the demand for higher education and the lack of capacity in the current system. By some estimates, by 2040, we will see a 68% growth in demand for higher education. We don't have capacity in the system to meet that demand right now. Challenge number 2 is the quality of tertiary education. Are we adequately preparing our students for jobs and careers? Some estimates indicate that 65% of students graduating from high school may have jobs and careers that don't exist today. So how are we preparing our students, not just for known jobs and employment, but for jobs that may be coming in the future? Challenge number 3, there's a whole segment of society that higher education institutions are not able to address. These are learners who have graduated from university or who may have never gone to university, who need help with upskilling, retooling, and advancing their careers. There is a gap there. Challenge number 4, there are broader issues of health, climate, environment, and social issues that really require universities to lean in through research, through interdisciplinary solutions that can actually move the needle on some of these problems. Higher education is not quite there with both the quantity and the quality of the research we are able to produce right now. And challenge number 5 are the existing economic models. Tertiary education is underfunded in a lot of places. There's increasing defunding of tertiary education, and this is a problem not just now, but also a problem as we look at the opportunities into the future. So where do we go from here? One is to recognize that the basic model of higher education right now is built for a different era, was built for a different environment. And it is unfortunate that a lot of universities, especially in developing economies, are aspiring to the current models, the Western models, that really don't meet the needs of our time. So we have an opportunity to really reimagine and rethink what higher education can and should be. What might be things to think about? I'd like to share 5 thoughts. 1, why should a university be seen as a brick and mortar place where people go to study? Why can't a university meet people where they are? That would mean leveraging technology in creative ways, but also in ethical ways, to increase access, to rethink how we teach, rethink how students learn, and really be able to be more efficient in our processes like assessments and so on. Opportunity number 2, how might we reframe who we serve? From just serving students, high school graduates who want to go to university, how might we reframe that to include learners at any point in their lives who could benefit from the assets and knowledge that an institution of higher education can produce? Opportunity number 3, how might we create new designs for learning, create new learning products and experiences to meet the needs of our societies beyond what we have inherited from the past? So why should an undergraduate degree take 4 years? Why should every degree look exactly the same? What would be alternative ways of credentialing? Why can't universities offer more than just degree programs? Opportunity number 4, how might we leverage partnerships with private sector organizations to improve our curricula, to create better opportunities for our students, to allow us to be more entrepreneurial and generate some revenue for institutions of higher education to tackle some of these important problems? And opportunity area number 5 is how might universities take greater responsibility for the social, economic, health, climate issues in their local communities? How might we do research that helps to solve local problems? How might we prepare our students to solve these local problems? And we don't have to do this as universities, as individual universities. How might we create collaborative models with universities in our regions, in our countries, global collaborative models that allow us together to have greater impact for our societies? Thank you.
Dear colleagues, my name is Hans de Wit. I am a Distinguished Fellow and Professor Emeritus at the Center of International Higher Education at Boston College in the United States. It's a pleasure to address you with a short statement about the current state of global higher education for the HELM Summit on November 15. Of course, a short statement of 3 to 5 minutes to address all the problems that we have in higher education and its solutions is nearly impossible. But I want to highlight some of the main issues that are at place. Higher education everywhere is under enormous pressure. An enormous pressure of lack of funding, of increasing privatization, of increasing exclusivity for those who want to aspire to enter into higher education, and for the lack of ways to solve the major problems our planet has. We are facing, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, as a result of the challenges of climate change, and as a result of geopolitical tensions, nationalism, populism, and racism, very serious problems in our societies. And it all has its impact on higher education. There's an increasing inequality in access to higher education between different types of institutions and the way they can provide a quality higher education and research, and between countries, in particular between the global south and the global north on the one hand, and Asia, in particular China, as a rising big player in the field. Of course, the crisis of the invasion in Ukraine has an enormous impact not only on higher education in Ukraine, but also in Russia and in the rest of the world. The increasing tensions between the United States and China, between Australia and China, and Europe and China also are impacting academic cooperation, in that sense that we are facing all kinds of tensions between national security issues and how important it is that we are working together in a global context. We, as higher education institutions, as researchers, as students, and as administrators, we need to keep as much as possible the channels open. Isolation is not a solution, but is a problem for higher education. Only when we are working together, we can address the problems that our planet faces. We can solve the Sustainable Development Goals together with all the actors if we are collaborating, not if we are closing borders, if we're getting isolated from possibilities to collaborate with our colleagues everywhere. In that context, it's very important that also the Global South is considered as an equal partner, that it's not the dominance of the Western higher education community or the increasing power of countries like China, etc., that impacts, for instance, higher education in Africa. You are important enough to take a leading role together with others in addressing the issues of our societies as academic institutions. I wish you all the best in addressing these issues during your summit, and hopefully in the future we continue to look not at problems but at solutions for higher education and for our societies. Thank you very much.
What is the current state of South African higher education?
South African higher education system taken as a whole remains one of the most important post-apartheid institutions in South Africa. The higher education sector in this country, I believe, has done a lot in making sure that our democracy fulfills its mission of catalyzing the rights and promises for equality, for inclusion, for the majority of South Africans. I do believe that our system has got its own challenges, but it has done a great deal in making sure that different levels of society, people from all walks of life, generations after generations of young people have been enabled to migrate and to move and to transition to better lives for themselves, for their families, for their contribution to the economy. So in that sense, I believe that the South African higher education system is one of the preeminent entities, players in the democratization of South Africa.
What do you think are the main challenges and opportunities in the South African higher education sector?
I think one of the main challenges which a lot of my colleagues would agree to is the underfunding of the higher education system. Government has done a great deal in the past few years following Fees Must Fall to at least fund the access of students to higher education, but we remain very much challenged in terms of the funding of research and innovation compared to other countries of our size globally, the economies of our size. The innovation system in South Africa still remains underfunded, but also what I think is the problem is the unequal resourcing of the system based on where the universities are coming from in terms of their own history. So I am quite aware that at the moment government is working hard to making sure that we evolve a much more equitable funding model of the higher education system so that all universities, irrespective of their types, are funded according to their needs and their histories and their asset base that they have.
So, colleagues, there we have it. And just to summarize some of these important insights, Professor Bawa draw attention to what I guess we can speak of as an existential crisis for higher education, a crisis around science, knowledge and truth, and trust. He spoke of knowledges and the importance of pluralism and decolonization as an important means for resetting knowledge and pluralism. He spoke also of the multipolarity of science and knowledge, especially in the context of what I call a possible default to a new Cold War. He also spoke of the impact of the new science and technology, or the new sciences and technologies on knowledge production, and drew our attention to the importance of social and economic justice. Dr. Ipe, on the other hand, spoke about the lack of capacity in the university system to meet rising demand. She also spoke about the quality of higher education, the importance of jobs and careers for the known and for future roles. Spoke about upskilling and retooling and alternative credentialing. Explored with us health, climate and environment and social issues, and highlighted that higher education research at present is not suited for mounting an appropriate response, encouraging us to reflect on partnerships with the private sector to mount an appropriate response. And finally, she spoke about the existing economic models informing the financing of higher education, and highlighted the under and defunding of higher education. And then in that respect, also draw our attention to the importance of universities playing a role locally in solving problems through their research and through student engagement. Professor Hans de Wit spoke about the question of funding again of the university system, about his concern for increasing privatization and exclusivity, and the lack of ways to help solve major global challenges. He raised concerns about rising nationalism, racism, xenophobia, and exclusion trends. He next highlighted global tensions and quote-unquote national security concerns and the impact of these on research. And finally, he spoke about the importance of collaboration and that collaboration should be at the core of what we do as universities in our localities, in our regions, and globally, as opposed to the closing of boundaries. And for him, that is a primary condition for us to be able to solve global grand challenges. Professor Muthwa spoke about higher education in South Africa being a preeminent post-apartheid institution that has been instrumental, in her words, in enabling South Africa's democracy to advance its mission in respect of the Bill of Rights, by way of example, and constitutional democracy. She drew attention to how higher education has enabled widened institutional, social, and economic participation, especially from rural and urban poor communities. Drew our attention to underfunding as a significant challenge, noting that much has been done by government since fees must fall in South Africa in particular to enable widened and state-funded participation of working urban and rural poor communities. However, a significant gap, she notes, exists in funding for the countries or of the country's research and innovation system, which now is lagging that of comparable peer nations. And finally, she highlighted the historic unequal and underfunding of some institutions in South Africa, and that this required urgent attention if all institutions and institution types are to flourish. Professor Hoppus drew our attention to the importance of multi and transdisciplinarity and spoke passionately about the topic that Professor Bawa drew our attention to, the question of knowledges and pluralism and decolonization and the importance of universities in the, if you like, political South coming to grips with their roles and responsibilities. So colleagues, that gives us a summation of the inputs that we have received this morning. And we have one question, observation that I see has been fed to us, and it's how can the higher education environment manage the changes required to broaden its value and impact when the basic infrastructure in some countries are lacking to meet those needs? And the colleague says, I speak directly to the problems faced by South African students during the pandemic and forced lockdowns with a failing energy production system and a lacking network capacity for online learning. Oliver, I'm not sure if you want to pick up on that conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ihron. I think it's important. I think what we've learned from COVID, especially in the global south and in more specifically in South Africa, that in some instances, we continue the divide in our university system. I think the challenges that we had initially around moving from face-to-face and in-person learning and teaching suddenly in a knee-jerk kind of reactive way to fully online delivery. I think that in itself was a major challenge. So that shift that needed to happen in our university system. And I think in some respects, that was a global challenge too, but unlike in other higher education, more developed higher education systems, a number of universities already in those spaces have been working in hybrid mode, have been teaching and learning in hybrid mode. So for us, it was a brand new experience. I think the issue of infrastructure, it just not affects our universities, although in most instances we're better off than some of our infrastructure and our education systems lower down in the primary, secondary, and even basic levels. So I think in some respects, universities are doing a bit better, but I think there's a massive challenge. I think the issue of trying to address the students' needs in particular, coming at this approach where we need to think about student-centeredness being part of what we do and embedded in our thinking, in our way of doing, in our way of teaching and learning. So I think that in itself is a kind of mental pedagogical challenge. I think what we've also picked up from Dr. Socikwa's input around we need to be more humanized in the academe. And I think that's also in relation to how we address some of the challenges we face. But I agree with the colleague. I think infrastructure remains a massive problem in South African universities. I think also on the continent in particular. And we've got to find ways to work collaboratively and find ways to resolve some of those issues and always have the student at the center of those initiatives to support and to advance learning and teaching. Over to you, Ihron.
Yes, thanks very much, Oliver, for those insights. Just an observation from my side. I had the special privilege of being asked to administer one of our universities between 2019 and 2021. That's Vaal University of Technology, and just as I settled in and began to put together a team to assist me to help reset the university, COVID-19 lockdowns came into effect. And I must say that one of the factors that enabled us as a team at Vaal University of Technology to respond so well to shifting our programs online and to providing students with the support that they required. That's within a space of 3 months during the hard lockdown period. All of that was made possible with and because of the enormous passion, energy, commitment of our academics, our lecturers, our senior lecturers, professors, administrators, all jumped in and demonstrated that students sit at the center, that their teaching and learning sit at the center of their work. And we were able to complete the academic year early the following year, and then also to complete the next academic year on time at the end of December 2021. So my response would be that, yes, I appreciate that institutions differ, that rural-based institutions may differ from urban-based institutions, but in my small experience at Vaal University of Technology, it for me demonstrates that there is enormous passion and commitment and that even amidst rolling blackouts, even amidst hard lockdowns, we were able to enable our students to make the headway that they needed to make. That, of course, does not detract from the fact that, as Professor Muthwa had indicated in her remarks, we still sit with significant variance in funding of our institutions. Historically, Black universities, historically rural-based Black universities, continue to face enormous backlogs. And that is notwithstanding the immense investment which the state is making as we speak in student accommodation, in academic infrastructure, in those institutions. So I think there is an important issue for us to consider as we tackle these challenges and as we learn and build the conditions for success for our students. Oliver?
Thank you very much, Ihron. I think it's also important for us to locate the discussion in the global context. And so encouraging colleagues, especially those of you joining us from the US and Europe, to also post your comments and questions to us, not just for this session, but for the sessions to come. I think the importance of this kind of global, I think that one of the major benefits, I guess, of COVID and technology was that we could meet at the same time, sitting in different parts of the globe, talking through issues that have similar, impacts on our higher education systems, but probably in varied degrees, depending on our resources and capacity. But we often learn with these kind of engagements that there are more similarities, there are more commonalities that bind us together in the mission of the academe. And I think that's what we'd like to build on. I think Professor Odora has challenged us, and then Hans as well, to talk through solutions. I think I've been to too many conferences, we have, as I referred to them, as many talking heads saying the same thing we heard 10, 20 years ago. I think in a global space where we're part of a global community, where we've learned that interconnectedness is key, this kind of engagements are critical and hopefully the start of future collaborations between our respective higher education systems. I would strongly encourage the colleagues in closing from me to please place their comments, their questions in the chat. We will transfer them to the speakers, the facilitators, and the hosts, and we'll take care of them as we go along. So over to you, Ihron, as you prepare to introduce the next session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Oliver, and thanks again for reminding colleagues that we learn from each other through posting comments and observations, advice, wisdom, and solutions on the chat box, which we will also share once we receive those. And so, colleagues, we're running well on time now. Allow me now to hand over the baton to Dr. Carolyn Stefanko, former university president, CEO of Barrett Leadership Consulting in the US, and senior HELM associate, who is our host for the next session on what does the future hold. Over to you, Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Professor Rensburg. And I guess it's appropriate that you introduced me, and you're going to be on today's panel. So I'm very happy to join you. I'm joining you from Atlanta, Georgia in the US. And we have three fabulous panelists for our session today. One I know has just joined us, and that is Professor Lubis, who's the rector in Indonesia. Professor or Dr. Larry Robinson is with us, who's a president in the US. And of course, you, Professor Rensburg, former Vice-Chancellor in South Africa, but joining us as I think I understand, from London. Is that correct? So the bios for all the participants, the bios of our panelists are available in your material, and I encourage you to read them. I'm not going to say too much more about our panelists because they're each going to be asked to speak a little bit about themselves and about their institutions and the context of higher education in the countries where they serve or have served. The format for our hour to 90 minutes today is going to be that I will start out by posing questions, which I shared in advance with the panelists. I hope that our interaction will be conversational. So feel free to, add extra comments after you've had an opportunity to respond to one of the questions and speak maybe directly to something that one of the other panelists has said. And the questions are really going to be about the challenges that you face and have faced in higher education, how you have made decisions, the role that you play as public leaders, and other kinds of topics, especially about leading change as we think about the future. After you have a chance to respond to many of the questions, then what I'm going to do is open it up for audience participation. And as I think most participants have already been instructed, you can enter your questions into the chat. And I guess in the case of this plenary, one of my technical geniuses in South Africa is going to be sharing with them, sharing those questions with me through the chat so that I can read some of them to you and we don't all have to be doing that. So let's get started. Will you each please spend a few minutes telling us about the university you lead or led, or in some cases, perhaps more than one, and about how it fits into the context of higher education in your country. And I would love to start with you, President Robinson.
Well, thank you and good morning, everyone. I am honored to be a participant in this summit, and I really find it very, very exciting just to share a few things about Florida A&M University. This institution was founded 135 years ago. 1887, October the 3rd, 1887, with 2 faculty members, 2 instructors, and 15 students, and now today we have over 9,000, nearly 10,000 students at the university. We are a historically Black college, we're a university. That's part of our history, part of our rich tradition here in the United States of America. However, most people will be surprised to find that in 2022, we have students from over 35 states in the United States and over 70 countries. So it's a fairly diverse environment. In fact, 1 out of every 4 students approximately are from somewhere other than Florida. So we're really a national university, as designated by U.S. News and World Reports. In fact, we're the highest ranked public historically Black college in the nation for the last 4 years. And we're ranked 103 in national public universities in general. And it's a great company to be in. There are about 104 historically Black colleges in this nation. And although they were founded to educate, former slaves and slaves, some even prior to the Civil War, today we actually offer tremendous opportunities to a very diverse group of students. And so my history at Florida A&M University is really, really directly related to this discussion about sustainability, because I came here 25 years ago as director and professor in what was called then the Environmental Sciences Institute. It is now the School of the Environment. It started in 1995, but was formally opened its first class of students in the fall of 1996. I got here in January of 1997. We have had a variety of programs. We have a full suite of degree programs, bachelor's, master's, PhD programs. We've had, since 1998, a Center for Environmental Equity and Justice, one of the strong points, I think, of the School of the Environment now, which made that conversion from an institute about 10 years or so ago. We also have within that school a Sustainability Institute to address a lot of the issues that colleagues just spoke about on this panel. And of course, I personally have had the opportunity to work with institutions in South Africa. Some of you may remember TEP, Tertiary Education Linkages Project, funded by USAID. We had a partnership with Mangosuthu Technicon, which is now, of course, Mangosuthu University, Mantech, as they call it. That partnership has been going on for well over 20 years now, and something we're really, really proud of. We are really excited about the role that we play as an institution in this whole discussion of environmental science, environmental justice, and sustainability. Is really part of our DNA, because when we look at where the bulk of our students come from around the world and around the state of Florida, they come from those areas that are most vulnerable when it comes to issues related to climate. And so we put a premium on doing research and development in those areas. Aside from my role as president of this university, which I've served for the last 5 years, I'm also the principal investigator on what is perhaps, the largest grant we have on my campus. It's the Center for Coastal Marine Ecosystem. It's a multi-institutional, 6-institutional research grant looking at a variety of issues related to climate and people in coastal environments in the Gulf of Mexico, the east coast of Florida, and even all the way to California. So it's really, really been a great opportunity for me to serve in that capacity. So I look forward to hearing more discussions about our partner institutions, and in fact, how we might partner more, because I think ultimately leveraging our resources is going to be the key to making the kind of progress we need to make on these issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And we haven't had a chance to meet before, and I'm really grateful for your participation and for this opportunity to learn from you and to hear about your history of work in South Africa in particular. I love the fact that I can think of a title of the future, the president as PI. I think that's fabulous. That's fabulous. You're a role model for us all. Also, thinking about you, President Robinson, reminds me that I should have also mentioned that this session is also being co-sponsored by the American Council on Education in the US in partnership with HELM and University South Africa. I'm also really delighted to welcome someone else I've never met before, and that is Professor Lubis, a rector who's joining us from Indonesia. Thank you so much for joining the Zoom today and giving us your time. And would you please spend a few minutes, as Dr. Robinson did, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your institution and higher education in your country.
Thank you very much, Sister Caroline, and all of the resource person or the speakers, and before me, President Robinson. Thank you very much, and I'm very glad to be here with you in this very precious program. I'm Professor Dr. Amani Lubis. Yes, I'm the first female rector of state Islamic universities in Indonesia. Our university is under the supervision of the Ministry of Religious Affairs. All of the institutes, universities, with the religious studies, they are under the supervision of Ministry of Religious Affairs, and other universities are under the supervision of Ministry of Education. So we have dual system in Indonesia, and so I'm now almost 4 years in the position, and thank God that I managed to be the servant of all the academic staff and students, and also respected by all of the staff and This is because I myself develop a system and a situation that we should respect one another, and also we should have the ability to work together as teamwork, strong teamwork. This is what I expected from my friends in the faculties and also graduate schools, because I'm the first female rector, and I should have more efforts to gather all of the officials of the university, so that we can follow all, or we can implement all of the programs, academic programs, service program in our university. And this kind of leadership, I develop it so that there is difference between female and male leadership. That's what I see, because that's my motto, that I lead with heart. I accept all of the suggestions that improve the welfare of staff and academic staff and even the students. During the pandemic COVID-19, it's very hard, the situation in Indonesia, and we need a lot of help, aid, and also financial support from many parties, so that we I follow the what I call the system, the management of for equality, for justice, compassionate, like this. And our university, it became a full-fledged university in 2002, but it was established in 1957, so that it's now 65 years old, and it's well established now. And we have 12 faculties and 1 graduate school. We have 83 study programs, undergraduate, masters, and also doctorate. We have 6 faculties, all in religious studies, Islamic, and also interreligious studies, and 6 others are the general knowledge, like medicine, health sciences, psychology, economics, political and social sciences, and also law, so that we can compete with the big universities, other big universities in Indonesia, and even we have the recognition of internationally recognized by having the ranks or rankings from international accreditation bodies, agencies. So that's a brief introduction about myself and also my university. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is so helpful to learn. I mean, I think for me, most of all, about the different ways that universities are organized in your country, and to whom your university reports, I suppose you could say, in a way, and also about your orientation towards leadership. I'm sure that's going to come up again as we continue our conversation. Professor Rensburg, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and the universities that you have been involved in leading?
Thanks very much, Carolyn. also to acknowledge Professors Robinson and others. Thank you for sharing your insight. So I guess part of explaining myself is to say that I spent all of my life in public service as an activist, helping to build the liberation movement in South Africa, and after the end of apartheid, playing a role with my colleagues and peers in state building and in laying the foundations for a new democratic South Africa. So that's been me, activist and state builder. And so when I had the opportunity then and privilege to build the University of Johannesburg, it was very special. So South Africa, up to the point of its democratic transition in 1994 and even shortly afterwards, was marked in terms of its university system by racial and ethnic division and allocation. We had 36 universities and technicons, or universities of technology now, that were organized along color lines or ethnic lines. Part of the post-apartheid democracy project was to rethink those lines, to reimagine them. And I was fortunate to be part of an advisory panel for the minister at the time, Minister Kara Asma, Minister of Education. And after much debate and discussion, one of the new universities that was to be created from the merger of these fragments, so to speak, ethnic, color fragments, was the University of Johannesburg. Some 3 universities were brought together with their 5 campuses in total, and I was asked to lead the establishment of the new university. Obviously, the merger itself required attention to detail, which I will not detail now, except to say that as we were stitching the new institution together, we were mindful that that was not the end point. That was a means towards nurturing a new post-apartheid democracy university. And so we kept our mind firmly focused on the ambition of our country and our nation, whilst making sure that the merger itself was successful. I just want to maybe just make 1 or 2 observations and then stop for now, Dr. Stefanko. Firstly, to say that one of the great challenges at the time, or one of the great debates at the time, this is around 2004, 2003 in South Africa, was some will say a rather unnecessary debate about whether to pursue separately or together inclusion and diversity on the one hand and excellence on the other. And what we were quite clear as we were building the university or establishing the University of Johannesburg was that we would pursue both. And I am comfortable to say that that journey continues. The evidence suggests, as I outline in the book that is referenced also in my short bio, the evidence suggests that the university has made good progress in respect of driving both inclusion and diversity and transformation on the one hand, and excellence on the other hand. And it's evidenced in part by the fact that 90% of its student body is Black in the South African definition, and it is almost 57% women, the enrollment, and as many as with many of our peer institutions in South Africa, as many as 2/3 of our first-year students are first-year university entrants. So a big shift for that institution. And then its research publications have really climbed in recent times. It is now in the South African university system and research output system, the leading provider, if not second leading provider of publications outputs. And so I believe that is an important project and accomplishment of that university. Actually, let me pause there and revert back to you.
Thank you so much. You know, I think what's resonating most with me is your use of the word means, the university as a means to accomplish, you know, larger social, political, and economic change. And, you know, for me, when I think about means, I think about mission. And I think that Dr. Robinson spoke about that. Professor Lubis spoke about that. But of course, one's leadership to further the mission of one's institution in the context of the country, right, and the times in which one leads, is buffeted by all kinds of headwinds, right? Headwinds, challenges that we face. And so I wonder if you each could speak a little bit more about the challenges that, you know, your university and or universities in your country have faced over the last, you know, 5 or so years. Certainly the pandemic is one of those. I don't know who would like to start.
Well, I'll start since I'm the oldest of the group. Well, as I said, I've been at Florida A&M University over 25 years, served in various capacities, as I said, starting as director of the Environmental Sciences Institute. I went on to serve as provost, and I served as interim president on 3 different occasions. I served as VP for research, et cetera. So I know just enough about all of those positions to be dangerous. But there's been a major transformation in the state university system that we're in. So there are 12 public universities in the state of Florida. And then there are 28 former community colleges, right? We call those state colleges. Traditionally only offering, you know, associate and degrees, 2-year degrees. And the rest of those were offered by the 12 state university system institutions, of which we are one of those institutions. When I came to Florida A&M University 25 years ago, the state of Florida, this system had a primary focus not only on excellence, but access, right? There weren't enough of these, enough of those for the state to really achieve its mission. Now, I'm really proud to be in the state that for the last 5 years, according to U.S. News and World Reports, it's the #1 state for higher education. And I apologize to the state of Georgia. I know you have some very fine institutions there too. But that's just the case. However, in the last 10 years, and perhaps even more so in the last 5 years, the emphasis has shifted where the state university system is not deemed as a place for access, right? Access is the purview of the state college system. And it creates quite a challenge for those of us who throughout our history have focused on access. At Florida A&M University, even today, 1/3 of our students are first generation, right? 1/3, right? And we have the highest percentage of federal aid assisted students in the state university system of Florida by far, over 60% of our students, or approximately 60% of our students. We're judged now primarily by a performance funding model that looks at outputs, right? Graduation rates, retention rates, percentage of students who are gainfully employed after 1 year, who go on to post-baccalaureate, programs of higher education, the percentage of students who graduated in areas of strategic emphasis, STEM, and so on and so forth. And the same applies to Florida A&M University that applies to everybody else in the system, University of Florida, Florida State, and so forth, right? And so there is a model now that focuses on output, and excellence is pretty much the dominant word of the day. Student success is the dominant word of the day. We formerly had in this model, 4 years ago, maybe 3, in terms of the graduation rate metric, a 6-year graduation rate, right? Which gave you time, if students had some issues that they may not have been most proficient in, you could address. But now there's a 4-year graduation rate metric. So it changes the whole dynamic in terms of recruitment, et cetera. And just to tell you how this story plays out, so we've had record years of students to apply to Florida A&M University the last 2 years. Record numbers, and we are already, in terms of students who are applying for the fall of 2023, we're probably going to break last year's record, right? But the problem is that because of the rigorous standards that are in place, and we don't set them, they're set by the system. Last year, for example, we had over 16,000 students who apply, maybe 12,000 at the undergraduate level, and we only admitted somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000. So that's a tremendous number of young people striving to get into, an institution of higher education, but they're not able to. And so I worry about those young people as much as the ones who do get in. Of course, we put a lot of emphasis on those students for very obvious reasons. So that the whole dynamic has changed here in the state university system of Florida. But I do think it has forced all of us to think more about the student profile and what we can do as institutions to help them finish in a timely manner, because it does matter. You cannot argue that any of those metrics that I mentioned aren't important. They are extremely important, right, to the students in particular. And so the focus is primarily on student outcomes, and then being able to prepare students in areas that the state, our board of governors, the governing body for our system, have deemed most appropriate. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you so much. Professor Lubis or Professor Rensburg?
Okay, yes, thank you. Of course, nowadays we have a lot of challenges and future issues that us in Southeast Asia. So I'm happy that we are talking now about from Africa, South Africa to America to Southeast Asia. So you're fortunate, Caroline, you're happy to talk to all of us from like half of the hemisphere. Yes. Okay. Our challenges nowadays is the educational transformation. And Indonesia is considered the big country with 275 millions of population, and we have also now facing the boomers of the young people, young generation. And as for my university, every year we accept 7,500 students, male and female, and now the undergraduate is almost 35,000, and for master's degree and doctorate more than 2,000. So that it's a big number. And we have a big campus also, some 3 compounds in the same area. But we need to improve our facilities, such as for the IT, IT management in our university, because after the pandemic we cannot do the conventional way of education. We should combine. Before, like last year, we do 100% online learning, but in this year 2022 it's done by hybrid, so some classes in the classrooms and some in the with the online system. So we do the synchronic and asynchronic system of learning, so that we need a good IT equipment. This is one of the challenges. And also as for the academic development, we also need to keep pace of the time for giving the young generation the opportunity to study, especially for vocational programs. And we develop some of the professional for vocation, and the professionals for the nurse and pharmacists, and also doctors, medical doctors. So we need to improve or make the facilities available, so that we can add more students and also lecturers. And as for the philosophical policy or system in our university, we have a mandate to combine the general sciences and religious sciences. So what we call integration of knowledge. This is also our task to better the achievement of the researchers and also the studies, that we should make this happen, and as good as possible to combine all of the approaches and also sciences. By this, we also facing the another challenge in as for the outcome of the study of the educational system. We need to enter or the link and match with industry. We are supposed to give the young generation knowledge to enter the industry, whether IT industry or industry means like factories. Our university also, this is one of the our challenge to enter these fields. I think that what we face, and we need to improve our internal educational policies, and at the same time we also inform or collaborate with the ministries, Ministry of Religious Affairs and Ministry of Education, about our development in our university. So the name of our university, I've never been said the name yet. It's Sharif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Jakarta, because we have a similar name, but in other cities. But we are in Jakarta, the capital city of Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Rensburg?
Thank you very much, Dr. So I thought that I'd make just two quick interventions. The first being my apologies. I just had somebody come into the room to take care of it. Apologies. So I wanted to begin by saying, just to pick up on Professor Robinson's intervention, that we take for granted the subject or the topic of access at great risk. And so part of my work at the University of Johannesburg, as we began that project there, was to, if you like, to build a consensus in the institution, to if you like, build a movement that connected the senior management team with the heads of academic departments and deans, and with our senators, of course, council or the board as well, but in particular to build internally alignment between the ambition or the vision of what we kind of called accessible excellence, and to, on the basis of that, take the work forward. And that was hard work. And it involved probably an 18-month period of conversation and dialogue, of engagement, of listening, of hearing, of persuading, of winning over colleagues to the idea that to provide access, to widen access to urban and rural poor is not to bring the university down. It is to take the university up instead. And so at the same time, it was to convince the colleagues that to diversify our academic staff at the same time was to elevate the university, was to broaden perspectives, to bring new insights, was to affirm our national identity or our emergent national identity. It was not to bring it down, it was not to destroy it. And so a university that only had 15% Black academics on its staff soon became a university with 50% Black academics on its staff and 15% academics who are African from outside of South Africa on its staff. And at the same time, the institution excelled on those indicators that Prof. Robinson has referred to, including its research outputs. And so I think it's important for us to constantly keep in mind this important dialogue about access, widened access, inclusion, transformation, and excellence. There's a second quick one to speak to, and that is perhaps the big challenge of collaboration amongst peer institutions in the same city, if you like, or collaboration across the country. And quite often we default very quickly to international collaboration, and that's important. That's not unimportant at all. But it seems to me that oftentimes, because of our inward focus on our institutions, to put it gently, others will look at us and say, actually, it's simply your egos, your egocentric nature as university leaders that prevent you from being able to collaborate in your own city or in your own region or in your own country. And I think that is an issue that we should give serious consideration to and reflect on how we build national collaboration, regional, local collaboration more substantively, rather than simply pro forma, administratively. We belong in the same organizations, but actually, if we look at our collaborative work, it is not strong on the ground, so to speak. What we tried at the University of Johannesburg was to focus on partnering in particular with our historically Black universities, and to invest much effort in working together to build capacities in our peer institutions at, of course, their request and at their pace, so that they could begin to offer programs that are highly valued, undergrad programs, postgraduate programs that are highly valued in the market, and that would enable them to grow their income in substantive manners. And secondly, it was also to work with some of those peer institutions to build research capacity. And one looks today at one or two institutions that we were privileged to work with, and we can see how they have climbed the ladder in terms of their publications output. But it does seem to me that this is an area of grave weakness, our ability or lack of ability to collaborate in our cities, in our local areas, in our regions, in our national settings. Thanks very much, Dr. Stefanko.
Yeah, there are a lot of challenges, and what I'm hearing from the three of you are tensions, really. You know, you all talked about tensions in different ways. The tension between access and funding models, right? And funding models and outputs. The need to serve your mission, but I mean, I don't know any institution that says that it has enough resources, but Professor Lubis in particular talked about facilities and IT. I know in the US we often talk about, and one of my big concerns was deferred maintenance. So it wasn't always about new things, it was about taking care of the buildings and things that we already had, and the kind of issues that many of us inherit. It's about collaboration, but I see another tension there too, right? The tension between being global, which we're expected to be and we want to be, but then also working on collaborations within our region or within our nation. So given all of the challenges that the three of you discussed, if we think just a little bit about how you make decisions as a leader, because I would like to talk a little bit more about leadership in general, could you talk a little bit about the frames that you use? And I know that Professor Lubis already alluded to this earlier in her original introduction when you said that you lead with heart, and that you believe that as a woman you lead differently. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but could the three of you briefly address what frameworks you use as you think about the decisions that you have to make as the leaders of your institutions?
Well,
Okay.
I guess I'll go again. Well,
Professor Lubis.
Professor Lubis, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so at the beginning, at the beginning of my presidency of the university, I just look around and study about the situation, and I don't have a certain pattern of the leadership. But what I know, there are characteristics and attributes that a good leader should stick on, like, of course, consultation, discussion, and then to make a good decision in a good time, and then to hear a lot from the staff and from the students. So by this, in a course of time, so that I can begin my shape of leadership, what I call this visionary leadership. I look forward what's the academic and management of our university look like in the near future and far future. So this visionary leadership, it's very positive to me, and I also have the patience to know the details, and I considered, and it's from my religion also, we took this lesson that to know details is trustworthy. So that I also take this burden to know as much as detail as I can. Detail about accounting, detail about teaching, about everything, because I personally like to learn new things, so that I can also read from the situation and how should have the planning and then organizing, monitoring. I use very much WhatsApp to monitor the works, and also to ask from everyone the performance they made, and the achievements, so that and I record all of the achievements and all of the good things that happen. And besides, I also critical to some situation in the university, whether in the management or in the how we have the philosophical or the mission of our university is managed, so that I should have also the ability to manage to control all duties. And as for from the tradition of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, there is a saying that innamal a'malu bil khawatim. It means that we should work for a result, for an achievement, so that I follow also result-based management. So money follow program, not the vice versa, and not the contrary. So that I see the deeds are but the finals. So the result is important, so that we should control our our policies and also the program that are done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you know, we could spend the rest of the day talking about challenges, right? And they are quite large in number. However, if you do that, you might lose sight of all the other wonderful things that we have the opportunity to do at our universities. In fact, you know, were it not for this meeting, I would be in my leadership team meeting with my senior leadership team folks. And we start each meeting out with what I call a great things moment, sort of sets the tone, so that we start with something very, very positive. And, you know, not just one or two things. I go around the table, listen to my direct reports and some who are not, about something that had happened in the last few days since we last met that they think falls into that category. So it sort of changes the mindset. We do have problems that we have to work on, but I think we have more opportunities than we do problems. You know, our university motto is excellence with caring, and that's something that I firmly believe in. We have to make sure that everything we do is done that way, in a sense, with a sense of excellence, you know, from how we operate, financial aid, you know, the housing, all those kinds of things, how we teach in the classroom, and so forth. But that caring piece is also important to me. And, you know, it sometimes requires a definition that some people might not see. So we do care about every student, every faculty, every staff member, and every member in the communities that we serve around the state and the nation. But at the same time, we have to care about each other, right? Respect one another, and build sort of a collegial environment that, you know, we think will help move us to that next level. And we're always trying to get better. We don't want to become stagnant. And in fact, we just went through the process for establishing our next 5-year strategic plan, right? It's a very detailed plan. However, implementing it will be the opportunity, right? And so in order to do that, we looked at how we were structured as an institution and decided, well, if we really want to get this done and want to get to this level, we need to restructure. And so we just did. We announced it about a week and a half ago, a new structure, included a new position, chief operating officer role and so forth. And there's a lot of detail in that, but it's because we just didn't want to become stagnant. And then we couldn't be afraid to make changes that allow us to get to where we want to go. But we have a blueprint for the future. It's our new strategic plan. We call it boldly striking, right? There are 5 or 6 strategic priorities in there. The number one priority, however, is student success. We can never forget about that. That's why we're here. And everything else in there, from expanding, research capacity and all of those things, really, you can connect all of those back to that first priority in terms of student success. We don't ever want to forget about that. That's why we're here.
Thank you. Thank you. So what I'm hearing from both of you is, obviously institutions of higher education are about learning, but you're each holding yourself up as lifelong learners. And in addition to caring about all members of your community, you're results focused. As I also dedicated my career, to students, it's about student success. Professor Rensburg, can you add a few comments before we move on to a much broader question?
Yes, thanks very much. So I guess I want to begin by saying that it's important for me certainly to engage my senior team and colleagues in I guess what we call in leadership literature now transformational leadership. And there are really 5 elements that matter for me. The first being self-awareness. I think it's absolutely essential for us to learn these skills and capabilities. I'm reminded of some of the talk in the leadership literature that also challenges us to think about ourselves as athletes. We'll have to invest time and effort in training ourselves, in preparing ourselves, in learning new, in unlearning old, if you like. And so I think self-awareness is a critical part of that leadership journey for all of us. And with it goes self-regulation, our ability to adjust, to adapt, to revise, to recognize that the way we have led is not achieving the results, to recognize that we have to change course. By the way, to recognize that not all members on our team are the same or should be the same personalities, that we need diversity on our teams, on top of gender, sexuality, color, and other identities. It's equally important that we recognize that across the team, it's important to have different thinkers. I hope I get that across. So self-awareness and self-regulation, and then modeling that, so that the team, as a team, we can then also begin to model it together. We become as a team self-aware of each other. We become as a team engaged in self-regulation. There's a third element, and in particular in adverse and stressful circumstances, we speak of it as positive psychological capabilities, the importance to maintain a level head at a basic level when there's a crisis. We don't just jump and go and do things. We pause. We reflect. We become thoughtful. We are calm, and we turn things over and over and hear each other. I always say we've been given 2 ears and 1 mouth, so the ratio of listening and hearing should be in that ratio more or less. And so confidence, hope, optimism, and resilience are important as we build our teams, as we lead, and as we cope with crises. And then the last 2 elements are self-learning and effective and consistent communication with our colleagues. These are, I think, are essential frames or elements of the framing of a transformational leadership style. And it's ideally on that then that we build, in my experience at least, our strategic plans, our milestones, our individual performance agreements, and the conversations that we have throughout the year. So those are just some observations and thoughts. I mean, practically, if I could just make a quick comment, practically this was tested during fees must fall and roads must fall and outsourcing must fall in South Africa between 2015 and 2017. And whilst it was important for us to secure our campuses, as the campaigns regrettably became more violent and in some cases anarchistic, we also engaged in deep dialogue and conversations with the activists, with the worker leaders, with the student leaders, with the academic leaders. And within a matter of 2 weeks, we were able, if you like, to dissolve the issues through collective agreements. And finally, to say that everything begins also when, or everything goes better when we've built social and cultural capital in our institutions, when we model, if you like, transformational leadership, but also when we put in place practical things. So if, in our instance, in the wake of fees must fall or prior to fees must fall, when something like 20 or 18,000 of our students were unable to have 2 hearty meals a day, we didn't just observe. We jumped in, partnered with a big civil society organization in South Africa, and were able to provide 2 wholesome meals to our students. We didn't just look the other way when 5,000 students from the lower middle class were not able to pay their fees. We jumped in with the private and public sector to raise funds to make sure that those students complete their studies. So I'm just using this again to highlight the importance of social and cultural capital, so that when we go into a divisive crisis, that cultural and social capital could prove to be decisive. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And that is a great segue to one of the last questions I want to ask before we open it up to questions from our participants, because you really, Professor Rensburg, were just speaking about the role of the university and the university leader as an agent of change, and as the ability to utilize one's resources and one's perspective, one's team, in order to respond to problems, right? And that really brings me to the fact that, as we are all on our leadership journeys, to greater and lesser degrees, depending on the day, you know, we must recognize the fact that we are public leaders, right? Our institutions obviously are serving a public purpose, but we are public leaders as well. And this entire summit has been framed around leadership issues, but also around some of the biggest problems we face in the world. And one of the reasons I wanted, as I tried to put this session together, is why I wanted the three of you and people from, you know, different backgrounds, leading different institutions in different countries and obviously parts of the world, is because I really wanted you to be able to speak to some of these global issues and the role that you think universities can play in responding. And now I'm quoting from our framing document for the summit, you know, climate change, poverty, hunger, gender inequality, health and well-being, clean water and sanitation. And it's almost like we've come full circle because President Robinson, you started out by talking about the first role you held at your university. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is perfect, right? So I don't know who would like to start about your role as a public leader in working with your institution and in partnership with maybe governmental agencies, or other parts of higher education to respond to these global challenges?
Well, I'll start if you don't mind. I did have the luxury twice of stepping out of my leadership roles at the university and going into, you know, the public service sector. Just as an example, in 2007 to 2009, I served as really the last civilian science advisor at the United States Department of Agriculture, is what's now called the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And I served in that role on the leave of absence from Florida A&M University to try to integrate the issues around agriculture, environmental science, et cetera. I had a wonderful time going back and forth to DC and around the nation, talking with colleges and universities, in particular land grant institutions, about, you know, the role that agriculture plays, the big footprint that it plays, and how we had an opportunity to make a positive impact on some of the issues of the day, including climate change. And then again, in 2010, I was actually sworn in on the steps of this administration building as the Assistant Secretary for Commerce for Oceans and Atmospheres, the National Organization of National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Deputy Administrator, and spent a lot of time working first on the BP oil spill that had just occurred, you know, a month or so earlier, but also some of the global basis, looking at issues around climate, trying to have the Obama administration at the time implement a national ocean policy. So I got to hear and provide input into all of those practices. Currently, however, that has helped me, you know, sort of shape the things that I really wanted to play a role in. As president of Florida A&M University, I still can't think of much more important than everything you mentioned is important, but the issue of climate, health, are critically important to us as an institution because of the disparities that exist and the potential impacts that it's having on communities of color. So I actually, you know, I serve on the Second Nature's Climate Leadership, you know, steering committee, along with people like the president of Arizona State University and so forth, and providing input sort of on a national and global basis around, you know, how universities can play a role in, you know, changing our carbon footprint, looking more holistically at sustainability. In general, you know, we can't afford to sit on the sideline. We have to be the role models for our students to see, you know, not just coming and cheering at a football game or an event of that type, trying to let them see the broader role and impact that we should have as leaders. So I'm really proud of all of that. It has given me an opportunity to speak a little bit differently because of the experiences that I've actually had on a local and national level. I've served on local, you know, water quality commissions for the county that we serve in here. in Tallahassee, Florida. I've served on state level boards and currently do all of those things because they're important to me and the constituents that we serve, but the broader communities as well. You know, we've seen, and you just probably heard about, you know, we just had a hurricane a week ago, right? Almost unprecedented to have a hurricane, a Category 1 hurricane this late into the year, you know, and causing, you know, flooding and beach damage and so forth. And then last month we had Hurricane Ian, a Category 4, in landfall. And so many of those kinds of things are the consequences of climate, right? Climate change impacts. And I think that's one of the areas that you know, I'm going to be paying even more attention to and getting our constituents to understand, you know, what we need to do as communities to adapt and to mitigate some of the impacts we are likely to see well into the future.
Thank you so much for sharing. Professor Rensburg, can you also speak to this, the role of the Vice-Chancellor and of the university in terms of public leadership on some of these global challenges?
Yes, I think it's an underrated but an absolutely important role. And it's a role that is not easily taken on by many a Vice-Chancellor, I must concede. There are often times when I find myself pushed into a role when there are other colleagues who could be playing those roles. So, for example, I was chair of the predecessor to USAf. Then we called it the South African Vice-Chancellors Association. It's an exceptionally important role and place through which we can influence and help shape government policy, not only in respect of higher education institutional matters, such as funding, such as research, and so on, but also precisely in these grand challenges as well. I also chaired the Southern African Regional Association of Vice-Chancellors that stretched all the way up into Tanzania and Kenya and into the Democratic Republic of Congo, which gives you a strong footprint again, a strong network of colleagues who can collaborate and work together on these grand challenges. And I was privileged to serve as a commissioner of South Africa's National Planning Commission that developed our national plan for 2030 and beyond, where I chaired the one of three committees, the one on social capabilities, cutting across health, education, sciences, social development, and so on and so forth. And recently, my most recent job was to chair on behalf of the minister in South Africa the review of the higher education, science, technology, innovation and information landscape, which was really aimed at asking ourselves the big questions asked earlier by Professor Muthwa. What is the country's capability as we speak in the science and innovation space to be able to respond as a country now with its range of institutions, research institutions, universities, and so on, private sector research entities. So it was a landscape review of South Africa with the aim of evaluating its capacity to respond to these grand challenges and also to advise on 4 key grand challenges, including climate change, as critical to the country's future success. So you're absolutely right by raising this important intervention, which is that the vice-chancellors, university presidents, rectors, principals, in as much as we are expected to successfully lead our institutions, we also carry the responsibility to lead with our peers in nurturing national, regional, and global solutions to these grand challenges of our day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Lubis, can you speak a little bit about your role as rector, as a public leader?
Yes, thank you. As for these important matters about the climate change, poverty, hunger, so I believe that my university also has the role to educate the society, especially young generation, to have the awareness about climate change and also have the knowledge how to manage. Indonesia is an archipelagic country, so we have 2/3 of the country water or sea, so that just 1/3 of the country is land or islands. We have 17,508 islands. So that's a huge country and a huge number of islands, big and small islands. So in climate change, we are all aware, yeah, because of the climate in Indonesia, we are in the equatorial area, so that the challenges is very very dangerous in ours, and we are also in the ring of fire of the volcanoes. So all of the Indonesian people know about disasters, natural disasters, so that they are very aware about climate change. Besides, the international organizations also pointed to Indonesia as the lung of the world, of the earth, so that we should preserve our forest, our wood, so that not just the sea and water, but also the forest. And during the pandemic, there is a situation that cooperation between members of the society is very, very clear, because Indonesia, most of the people are working by their muscles. Yeah, so during the pandemic, they don't have places to work. They lost their work, so that what makes the people change their behavior in this and during the pandemic is they become farmers again. Yeah, during the past time they work in the cities, makes the urbans live like an urbans, but during the pandemic they back to nature. They even in the yards of the houses, backyard of the houses, they plant vegetables and what they need. And in Indonesia, women are very active, whether in organizations, faith-based organizations or social-based organization. In these organizations, they arouse all of these subject matters, the importance, like how to preserve water, clean water, the well-being of the person, and also about gender equality, because I myself an activist also, so gender equality is important, and we use religious texts, yeah, religious interpretation of the teachings to defend, to protect women, to protect the girls, and to give them better chances in the society to work, to study. And most of the women of Indonesia are free now, and they can express themselves and to be independent in the society. So our university, because we have 83 subject, 83 departments or study programs, so we can, besides we do research in these matters, how to know all of the problems of the society. But I believe that our university have the role in eliminating poverty of the society. We are in the suburb of the capital city, but also there are many poor people in the big cities, so that we try to have the to give opportunity mainly to women, for women, because women are more active to seek loans from the banks and to work whatever they can work and sell to the neighborhood. So we are very much encouraging the microfinance and the small enterprises, and women mostly have this active in this field. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the three of you for speaking to those challenges and to the difficult task of how you bring people together, you know, on your campuses and in your communities to address the issues that are, you know, next door, right? You were just speaking, Professor Lubis, about being in the suburbs, but being close enough to the city that, you know, you're well aware of the problems that have to be addressed more locally. And then these global challenges within one's nation and across national boundaries. A couple of questions have come in, and we only have about 15 minutes left. I'd like to address at least one of them, maybe both of them, if one or more of you would like to speak to them. I'll read this one. It's rather long, but really the question is about, you know, Professor Lubis, you were speaking about the vulnerability of people in general. And this is really about the vulnerability that some people feel within our own higher education institutions. So the questioner wrote, we often hear that universities, or maybe better higher education, should be involved in leading or at least being involved in societal changes. Higher education as a whole would be more effective if it could speak with a common voice. A university is its people, and faculty, staff, and students feel vulnerable, and rightfully so, when trying to articulate and support change. At what point and how does higher education start speaking as a common voice? So any responses to that question from one of our participants?
Yeah, Carolyn, if I could just briefly, we're part of a state university system here in Florida. There are 12 institutions here, and you know, we have an opportunity every week where the 12 presidents meet with the chancellor of the system, and we talk through issues that impact our students, faculty, staff, in our communities, and we take stock of those things as we go back for those meetings and address it within our respective universities. On the other hand, there are some national organizations, you know, like the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, or APLU, that is very vocal and incorporating, you know, our collective input as public institutions across the U.S. And delivering messages, you know, to Washington, D.C. and other places, right? And it's a very, very effective mechanism. There are several of those like that we are members of, that carry, you know, those messages on our behalf. Then, of course, there is the community, the unique community that I'm in, the historically black colleges and universities. You know, the 2 groups or 3 groups that we are members of, that sort of are the sort of the voices about, well, they carry our collective voices. You have United Negro College Fund, you have the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which is for the publics, which we are. And then of course you have the National Association for Equity and Higher Education, NAFIO. And all those three groups we are really proud to be members of. And we sit around the table helping them to develop that agenda that goes to elected officials and other members of the private sector about the roles that we can play in helping them meet their bottom line. Most people thought, for example, I'm really appreciative of the support we got from the federal government with regards to the pandemic. You know, the CARES Act, the EARTH Act, CARISA. I apologize for these acronyms with my international colleagues, but there was a lot of money put on the table. But those concepts and were not necessarily conceived by people in Washington, right? There were people at universities like ours in Georgia and around the country who said, these are the things that we need to address the known impacts of the pandemic early on in 2020, and then what we learned later. One of the things we learned most graphically was that the so-called digital divide was alive and well. And so we needed monies to make that transformation in a much more organized manner, effective manner from, you know, in-person classes to remote to hybrid and to where we are today. We're in a much better position, but it's because of the collective voices of the institutions of higher education in this country that helped to convince the powers that be in Washington, D.C., that those would be great investments in the nation's future to be able to sustain the well-being of our students, faculty, and staff during that transition. And then just going back to another point while we're on COVID, we're really proud of the fact that we had the first community-based COVID testing site in the city of Tallahassee that didn't require, you know, physicians referrals and so forth, because that would have been a major obstacle to the constituents in our community who might not have had a physician at all that's now been able to get a referral. And so we started that community-based site on April 25th of 2020. It continues to this day. It also has a community-based vaccination site associated with it. And we have surpassed somewhere on the order of 680,000 tests administered at that site with people from all shapes and sizes and colors who have come to that site to get tested on our campus here. So we consider that to be a major part of our community presence and letting the community know we care about them as well.
So thank you. So what I heard in what you said, especially, was that higher education does and can and does speak with a common voice in the U.S. and through professional associations and also through government advocacy. And you used a great example of the response to COVID and how that not only helped institutions of higher education, but also helped the larger community. I'm going to ask one of the two of you, either Professor Lubis or Professor Rensburg, to speak to this issue because I want to move on to another question. And it can do one of you want to share something? Okay.
I think it's fair to say that we in a period in which intolerance has escalated sharply, whether it is in the US, in Europe, in Canada, across the length and breadth of Africa, Asia, Middle East, intolerance on our campuses is a significant challenge and problem. And it is polarizing our community in our institutions. And so I think that's the starting point for me, that we can't do research, for example, with Chinese peers, or if when we do that, it impacts our relationship with our peers in the US, or potentially does, so it is a problem. So we sit with global phenomena that is pushing us to the edge, to the brink of a potential Cold War, new Cold War, across our globe. whether it's Hong Kong, Middle East, and so on. And so the question is, what do we do? And it seems to me that Professor Robinson is correct, that we need to build our social movements. We need to nurture our organizations, whether these are labor organizations representing our academics, whether these are student movements or broader societal movements in defense of academic freedom, in defense and in protection of the rights of our academics. Because when we fall in respect of and fail in respect of the rights of academics to academic freedom, then we fail our people, we fail our planet, because then questions are raised, fundamental questions about trust and about science, and so on and so forth. And so I think that vice chancellors and presidents and principals and rectors can and do play an important role, both within their institutions to nurture safe spaces, often at the risk to themselves, but to nurture safe spaces in their Senate, in their executives, in their senior leadership teams, amongst their student leaders, amongst their labor leaders, in the broader academic community. They play important roles in creating safe spaces in institutions, and they play important roles with their peers in their associations, so vice chancellors or principals or rectors, in putting these issues full square on the table and tackling them head on. Obviously, recognizing the particular circumstances that face them in their country and the risks that they run themselves as leaders in those institutions. Thanks very much.
Thank you for, you both responded very, very differently to the question from one of our participants, but it was very helpful to think about this on two different levels. And Professor Rensburg, I appreciate the impassioned way that you addressed the issue of vulnerability and how if we create safe spaces, that will play a role. And if we defend academic freedom, as we understand it in different parts of the world. Before we close, I wonder if you could each speak for 2 minutes, and I'm going to start with Professor Lubis. I love thinking about this, and maybe it's because of where I am in terms of my leadership journey and my career. But as we think about our legacies, what do you hope is your greatest contribution to the future success of higher education? Not to say that you're stepping down, anytime soon, but nevertheless, when you reach our ages, you think about what you're leaving behind. So Professor Lubis, can you speak to that as our last question?
Yes, thank you very much. As for the legacy, I have seen it from now that my legacy is gender equality, because I'm the first lady rector, so that I convinced my friends or my colleagues in university to have gender equality in all of the positions, whether in the number of the deans, so should be like 4 deans women, and then fortunately that in the level of departments I have a lot, more than 18 heads of departments are women, and then the secretary of departments, 34 of them are women. So that this is my legacy, and I do it by convincing my colleagues that working with women, it is better, not better, but we can do things in in a good way. And second, that I have international experience, so that that's my also legacy, to have to make my university as a melting pot of the two big civilizations of West and East. So that I think this good to be remembered during my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And you know, gender equality has been a big part of my journey as well. And I appreciate the role that you're playing and the role model that you are. Professor Rensburg, can you share something with us about as you think about your legacy and your continuing work, obviously?
Yeah, so I left University of Johannesburg end of 2017, retired. But there really are two levels that I think about how we leave legacies behind. The first level is that of self, and the extent to which one has been able to model behavior, conduct, if you like, as I explored earlier, being a transformational leader, and leaving that behind in the DNA of your colleagues and of the teams and of the institution. I think that that's one helpful way, perhaps, of assessing one's legacy. And I explore that in part again in one of the books, Serving Higher Purposes, that's referenced in my short resume. The second level is, and as I explored again here today, to assess oneself as whether one has been able to build a model institution. And in the South African context, a good question would be, to what extent does your institution measure up to the post-apartheid democracy constitutional project, so to speak? And there are kind of two elements there that immediately come to mind. I referred earlier to accessible excellence. I'm hoping that I've been able to nurture that with my colleagues and insert it into the institution's DNA, a firm commitment to sustaining the course of widened access whilst continuing to strive for excellence. And then secondly, the transformation, inclusion and diversity project at the level of staffing, and for it to be sustained into the future with the range of initiatives from new generation scholars programs through to building a significant pipeline of postdoctoral fellows, now in the region of 600 postdoc fellows at the university, across, of course, to making sure, or at least putting in place the means to have upwards of 60% of our academics having PhDs, if not 100%. So these are kind of very specific initiatives then that constitute part of the bigger project of asking the question, to what extent have you nurtured here a model institution that can be a helpful reference as other university leaders commence with their leadership roles? Thanks very much.
Thank you for your tremendous legacy. And Dr. Robinson, you have the last minute.
Well, I'll be brief since I only have a minute. There are two tangible outcomes I would like to see at Florida A&M University, and it doesn't have to have my name associated with it at all. It really doesn't. And the first is I would like to see us, break into the top 100 universities in the nation as national public universities, as determined by U.S. News and World Report. Not necessarily because of the the prestige of that, but because there are some underlying metrics that do make a lot of sense. Graduation rate, how we invest in our faculty, alumni giving, and so forth. As we improve those things, we improve the welfare of the university in general. And then there's one more. I came to Fordham University from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, was managed by Lockheed Martin at the time, a major national, research facility, with the whole idea that I would love to see, FAMU sort of transform into a national research university as well. And that's our second major goal, and that is to become a Research One institution as determined by the Carnegie Foundation. And once again, not because of the title and prestige, but because it means a lot with regards to competitive research funding garnered, the scholarly output of faculty, and a number of students with doctoral degrees that we're producing as well. Those are just a couple of things I'd like to see this university evolve to, not necessarily after our departure, but as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robinson. Thank you so much, Professor Rensburg and Professor Lubis, for joining us today, all at different parts of the day, given where you are in the world. Thank you for your many contributions to higher education, to being transformational leaders, and for sharing your views with us today. I'm going to close the panel out, and I know that the next plenary is ready. So thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Carolyn. Cheers, bye now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, and thank you to our esteemed panelists. I think they deserve a round of virtual applause for their contributions. I think setting the scene for what's to come in our summit, talking about their current situation, talking about what informed them from the past, but more importantly, what the future holds for their universities, for the university system in their states, their regions, and in their country. So thank you very much for your time and contributions to this really exciting panel that we've just heard. Right, now it's over to me to hand over to our next host of our session, who is our Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Phethiwe Matutu, who will host our session, and she'll be joined by 3 panelists. And the session is really, as we're tying up the context, the experience, the lived reality of leadership, is reflecting at 3 different levels on leadership journeys. So I'd like to hand over now to our CEO, Dr. Phethiwe Matutu, to lead this final session. Over to you, Dr. Matutu.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Seal. I'm just wondering if Professor Jonathan Jansen is in already.
He's present. He's present.
Oh, lovely. Okay. No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that all the panelists are in.
I'm here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will start with this panel, which is going to be focusing on leadership stories. And we know that stories have been quite a significant part of our lives over the years. So it becomes quite crucial that we learn true stories, we share true stories, we get inspired and influenced true stories. So this one panel is going to assist us in that regard. We have 3 panelists, as mentioned. We have Professor Jonathan Jansen, who's a distinguished professor of education at Stellenbosch University. Also, he is the president of the Academy of Science of South Africa. We all know Professor Jansen. He's been the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Free State. And in my feeds this morning, I heard that when he comments and he supports Springboks, that appears in newspapers. So that is Professor Jonathan Jansen. And then we have Dr. Muki Muweng from the Nelson Mandela University. She's the executive dean of the Faculty of Education. And finally, we have Professor Vivian Lowick, who's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Teaching and Learning at the University of the Western Cape. They will be sharing leadership stories, and what we expect from them should not exceed 20 minutes. However, if there are short stories to be shared, then we can take the full round, and then afterwards we will go back to the first panelist if there are additional stories to be shared. In the process, we will be monitoring the chat box as well. We'll start with you, Professor Jansen. If not, can we just move on to Dr. Mueng from NMU? We'll start with you, Dr. Mueng. You're muted.
Myself?
Okay,
can you hear me now? All right, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I forgot, sorry, before you go on, I forgot to mention that the full bios are in the program. So colleagues, please help yourselves and just read the full bios, rich bios of the panelists. But for now, we'll start with Dr. Mueng, and at most 20 minutes.
Okay, so I've got 20 minutes, 15 to 20.
At most, yeah.
Okay, all right, no, that's fine. I'm not sure if Cindy, you'd like to share my slides, but if not, I can just talk from my own slides this side. I think the first question, is about pressing leadership challenges in the past year or so. And I think for everyone, I can't even say just for me, the pandemic, in the past 3 years has been, a pressing issue, because we had to deal with remote learning. And, as someone in leadership, as an executive dean, you have to look at the quality of outcomes if your students are not on campus. The connectivity, that is a challenge. Data is also a challenge. But in terms of staff, we had to deal with staff wellness, and we're still dealing with that. A lot of people were working from home, living alone, suddenly became, a challenge, because now people are behind the screen, and the lockdown restrictions really did not allow people to visit each other. So a lot of people were feeling alone. And sometimes, as the dean, you don't know until you are told, what is happening, with some of the staff members. And so last year, I decided to have virtual one-on-one meetings with each and every staff member, so that I can just ask, how are you? What are you doing? How can we improve, the working conditions for you at home, so that, at least people can be productive. But more than just productivity, it was a way of me saying that we are here, as a university, and as the dean, I am here, as a person. I've also then arranged, while we were still under restriction, there was a loosening of the restrictions at one point. So I arranged an on the beach kind of camping, picnicking. So we went, as staff members out. It was so nice to be able to breathe some fresh air, just to hang out and let our hair down, because of that kind of restriction that was there for so long. And a lot of staff members really appreciated, that time out of those singular, isolated spaces that they have sort of been trapped in. Again, another challenge would be student wellness. And I think I'm not only speaking for our university, I think it's across universities in South Africa that our students are really not well. Compounded by the pandemic, we were also looking at the conducive learning environment that our students did not have, because some students, come to residence to get away of, the home situation where the learning, environment is not conducive for them. And so they were plunged back into home, and that really did not sit well with them. They couldn't take it well. And student academic and psychosocial support was something that was now remote and online. And as universities, we were really struggling in the beginning to find ways of really looking into how we can support students remotely. And so what did I learn about myself? I became aware of my privilege, because when you look at me and when I tell my story where I grew up in Graaff-Reinet, dusty streets of Graaff-Reinet, really semi-rural area, platteland, you'd think that I need to understand, where others come from, but at times we forget. But the pandemic and all the exposed inequalities that were taking place really pushed me back to thinking and realizing the privilege that I have, because sometimes you forget that you are privileged. So I saw my own privilege, exposed by the pandemic. The unpredictability, the nebulousness, and the
you are cutting, Doctor. I'm not sure what's happening now.
Uncontrollability.
Yeah, that's better.
But as I was saying, this situation really required our full humanity, because we needed to be present and also listen for all of these things that were happening. And also having to balance between academic quality of programs, academic needs of students, staff, academic excellence. All of these balls will sort of have to be put in the air and really balanced. And how do you do that as a leader if you are not, actually listening to what is happening, and also being conscious and agile in your thinking. And so next slide, being forced to dance around, to dance against the prevailing conditions, because at times you have to go with the flow, at times you have to go around things, and at times you have to push back a little bit to the prevailing conditions, but also finding the right move. And this was a lesson that I've learned also with the Fees Must Fall, when it happened in 2015-16, that we also needed, I needed to find the right step and the right rhythm, but also to dance around and against these things, so that I could find synergy in what the students were saying and what the institution is saying. And remember, as the dean, most of the time you find yourself sandwiched between these polarities at times. So realizing that there will not always be congruence and alignment in what we are doing. And it's such a difficult thing for us in management to be able to realize that. And also know that it is okay to live with the messiness and the contradictions, and being able to forgive yourself, which is something that is very difficult to do, forgiving yourself for decisions that you have taken and decisions that did not work out. We become so hard on ourselves for us to be able to live with that. Next slide, please. So what were the highlights? So what do we need to look for positives, in all of this messiness and contradictions. And for me, the highlights were care and concern for others. We were brought to our humanity, to care about others, to be concerned. How are you? Where are you? Because we're losing loved ones and our students. Appreciating life and what you have. because most of the time when you're exposed to all of these things that are happening, you get to reflect back on your own life and start to really appreciate what you have. What we've seen also that came out, especially in my faculty, was more reflective research, because people were now sitting back and reflecting on their own practice, which is something that I really enjoy. And reviewing and revisiting our curriculum, the pedagogy, and our assessment, because what the virtual learning space, online learning space threw at us was to say, do it. And we needed to find ways of learning how to do it. Therefore, the pedagogy had to be different. In particular, for modes of delivery that are there now, that we're looking, at the academy afresh, I can say I'm unstable again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, thank you. So online exchanges that were made possible with international partners. And as we speak, we're celebrating our 25th year anniversary with Oldenburg University. So, and that work did not stop. We could, do those online exchanges, teaching exchanges, and student presentation exchanges, virtually. Next slide, which I think is going to be my last slide. So the online challenges, online technology enhanced pedagogy, which most of us were not ready for. We were not prepared for it. So this was a challenge, but there are those who are really, you go head in and try, and do their best. But we need to learn more in terms of that. I spoke about the plagiarism, really, dishonest students who hire other people to study for them. So those are the challenges that I'm talking about. And then you have staff members who are really now comfortable working from home and are reluctant to come back to office, and having to sort of, encourage them in different ways that you are working at a contact university, so you can't be thinking that you're going to be teaching forever, from home. Slowly but surely, we started at the university now in September to say everyone needs to come home, just so that people are ready for 2023. And so I think that is my story, especially for the past 2 to 3 years, in terms of the experiences and lived experiences that I've had as the Dean. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Doc, for your story. It's quite inspiring, and the successes that we've had over the past 2 years are quite energizing. And it's important that we are aware of the survey that we had recently, led by the Council for Higher Education and Training, University of South Africa, together with the University of Free State, which was a survey on staff experience of the perspective on teaching and learning and its future. It does reflect a lot of the experiences that you are highlighting in your beautiful story. Can we move on then to the next presenter? Professor Jonathan Jensen, are you there? Can you unmute, Prof? Thank you.
Good. Can you hear me?
We can. Thanks, Prof.
So what I'm going to do is, this is my third talk for the day, and there's another one later. So I take your instructions very literally. And so I will go with the instructions I got last night, which is a 5-minute talk on one question, and then later a 5-minute talk on another, if you don't mind. I don't think I have 15 minutes. So, so just for the context of the first question, I lead these days in schools, in universities, and in communities. In other words, I no longer have a high-profile job as a dean or as a vice-chancellor. So my comments on leadership over the past year or so would be very much in the context of what I do at the moment. So just two things very briefly. I think that one of the overwhelming experiences that I have as a leader in those three contexts is one in which citizens, the people of this country, feel a collective sense of loss, of collapse. And it's this compounding effects of these crises that, whether it's the corporate, the company that I speak to in Johannesburg, or the community this weekend in a shack school in the Cape, or anywhere else, people do feel a sense of distress and of dismay, and that has very direct implications for us as leaders beyond, as I said, just the academic job. Those crises are familiar to South Africans, the crisis of corona, of crime, of corruption, and of course this sense of the collapse of the grid. So one of the reasons we struggle to reach out in a simple thing like today is because of the unreliability of electricity supply, and this of course has a very direct effect on the emotions of people. And how do you convince followers of the value of their work, the power of the local, and the importance of hope when you are leading in such contexts, whether on campus or in the community? So the other question was, what do we do as leaders in these circumstances? And again, I just will speak from current experience. So when I enter communities like over the weekend, where there is this heightened sense of distress, I revert, or on campuses, I revert in these circumstances to what I know best. And that is to remind myself of the power of your example as a scholar in the university community. What does that mean? It means that your personal scholarship matters enormously, especially when you're working with young academics, and your role as a mentor in empowering next generation professors. This is absolutely important in situations of distress. And I try in the work that I do, not just at Stellenbosch, but across the country with the 26 publics, to play that role. Just to give you a practical example, we've just published a book a week or two ago called On Becoming a Scholar. And it's sort of 20 or so chapters by leading academics around the country from the different disciplines on things you need to know, things that can anchor you, things that can give you certainty, things that can give you a stepping stone in your career, on everything from academic duty to how to leverage the research office, to when and how to apply for promotion and the like. So that isn't for me about the book. This is about speaking through your scholarship to people that you serve in order to give them a sense of hope in a very dismal situation. Secondly, as a change leader in schools, I now spend about 25% of my time simply working with disadvantaged schools, where teachers have long given up on being excited about something as important as the act of teaching. Now, I don't have a lot of money, but I can leverage resources through the people that I know, and just this weekend building, partly out of our own pockets and partly out of leveraging the private sector, just to ensure that every school in a poor community has, for the foundation phase, simple thing, something like, play facilities during and for learning. So leveraging resources, and of course sacrificial giving not out of wealth, but out of the joy of making a difference in the lives of people. And then leading as a citizen in the public square. And as many of you know, for me, that means speaking out. When you see corruption in universities, corruption in schools, speaking out and fearlessly about the massive wastage of resources that could have gone elsewhere. And then, of course, also in the public square, to give people a sense of hope based on, for me, in several talks the other day in the Eastern Cape, on, a sense of history and also a sense of our institutions that are strong, and a sense of our people that are resilient. So that, in a nutshell, on the first 5-minute question, is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you, Phethiwe.
Thank you very much, Prof. The process we have followed is that you will answer all the questions and then we'll move on to the next speaker. Sorry if that was confusing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not ready for the second one yet, but maybe Vivian can go next.
Yes, no, that's fine. In which case, then she will do her part fully. Professor?
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jonathan, for giving me that hospital pass. You know rugby terms, so you know what I mean when you say you give that one to me. Colleagues, just in terms of context, I had the privilege of having had 2 roles simultaneously during COVID, and I think it's probably something that in my own life will go down as an unforgettable experience for many reasons. And that was when the pandemic hit. I was both acting Vice-Chancellor as well as DVC academic for 6 months, and there was no replacement for me as DVC academic at UWC, and I had to combine these 2 roles. And so a lot of the challenges that Muki mentioned, those would be the kind of challenges that most of our university, and I won't repeat them, around lack of devices, data, our poor connectivity in the country. Professor Jansen mentioned the electricity issues that we've been experiencing as well, but most importantly also our own contextual realities as a historically disadvantaged institution, as UWC, drawing our students from particular disadvantaged communities. And I think that context is quite important, because what was very striking for me, and this was very clear at USAf level when I was attending that oftentimes there was almost an underestimation of the systemic inequalities that we have in the country, that those universities that were very well resourced could quickly go and buy 5,000, 7,000, I won't mention names, devices for the students and try and get going as quickly as possible. And we had to be very creative at UWC. And I do want to reflect a little while on how we did it in order to ensure that we could successfully complete the 2020 academic year. And that 2020 academic year, I again acted for 2 more months in the next year, doing both roles. That set us up for 2021 and where we are now in terms of detailed planning, taking what we've learned, especially in 2020. So our roadmap is slightly different in a sense, if I can see it as a map. One of the first learnings was to not assume that you know the institution in terms of where our students are from, and we were making assumptions about our staff as well. So one of the first things we needed to look was how are we going to address our student and our staff needs, especially looking at vulnerable students. What Muki has mentioned, Dr. Moeng has mentioned around students that needed to be on res because they don't have a conducive learning environment at home. That's very true for UWC as well. And then in relation to remote students where students would not necessarily have an address. So even the logistics of either delivering a device, making sure that they could get data. If you have data, it does not necessarily mean that you have connectivity. And then the printed was, so there was a lot of thinking through, but what really helped us was a readiness survey, which we've conducted. One of the first things I said, let's work from an evidence base. Let's know what our student and staff needs. And we did that within 48 hours. More than 12,000 was surveyed. And it gave us a very clear idea as to what the resources were, who had smartphones, who had laptops, what kind of devices, where the students were, what were their peculiar needs. And that helped us to transition. When Dr. Moeng was talking about readiness, I think we had the advantage at UWC because we had already adopted blended learning in 2016 with FEES+4. And at the end of 2015, we realized that if we then have a community of practice right across the entire institution with departmental champions, then it would put us in a different position. So we were already above 90% on our learning management system. And I think when we started the training, there was a week when we came, in a sense, returned, not really physically from the hard lockdown, that we could do the training. And it was, for me, so wonderful to see our champions and our staff that are very familiar with this, training others and that vulnerability that came through. Another big lesson for me was, and I think it's probably my legal brain here, because I look at the big picture and I distill the principles. And I found that at UWC, once I've narrowed down the principles, faculties found it very workable to be taking the principles that would lead our actions and our thinking and translate that into plans. So we had the guiding principles for learning and teaching, flexible learning and teaching that we distilled. We had assessment principles. We even had principles around data light usage that really inform faculties. And so what we've done was to say, throughout this period, we are going to be engaged with staff and students. And Dr. Moeng mentioned this sense of loneliness and the sense of being, especially if you are a person that lives by yourself, and now, especially during hard lockdown when people couldn't really engage. My phone account was horrendous because I kept being on the phone and trying to reach to people. And one of my biggest learning, and I'll come back to this one shortly, was really around communication and how people feel when you as a leader reach out to them, communicate, listen with empathy, and make that connection, even if it's sometimes virtually. So what we've then also done was to say, let's look at how do we reflect at the end of that first semester assessments. We started again on the 20th of April, and then we've done a huge survey on staff and student experiences. And that informed our second semester. And so we use the data that we derive from those surveys to inform our decision-making for the next year, the catch-up period, when we finished on time, and that enabled us to then have a normal, if there is such a thing, academic year. But what stood out for me, what did I learn? And I actually reflected on this at the end of my acting period when I then reverted to my own role as DVC academic, and I wrote a short article in the Mail and Guardian on this. And these are some of the things that I thought, what did we learn through the dual lens that I had, that I felt I needed to share with other leaders on higher education leadership during COVID-19. The first one was to endeavor to make the best plans that are implementable, but be agile, because the situation was so fluid that your carefully laid plans, your best laid plans, may need to change as you're in the process of implementing them. And that ability to say, okay, now the facts have changed, therefore that decision you don't need to get stuck on because you've made it, but be agile and move on. The second one was to constantly be reflective and evaluate what you do, and if something is not working, change it. The third one was this, we learned even to a greater extent. I was so amazed by our staff being on WhatsApp at night and emails at night, because that's what most of the times when our students had data, to be attuned to human needs and wellness, and that the understanding that you can only implement plans that look beautiful on paper if people are mentally prepared to deliver on them, and if they have that mental strength, if they are well enough to be able to do that. Then also the understanding, I found there was a lot of steering in the system, from the minister wanting to have 2 reports every month, to trying to distill the systemic issues at USAf. And what was quite important for me was to understand that whilst you could try to achieve the sectoral approach, or a joint sectoral approach, where as far as possible, you needed to balance that with your own institutional realities and the complexities, because institutions are very different. And then probably one of the key ones is to listen to stakeholders, listen to our staff. When our staff were telling me that they were exhausted by the end of 2020, we needed to step back and say, look, when we go back, we're not going to go back to 2019. We're going to find within all of this a new way of working and agility. The communication, I cannot stress enough. It's about effective communication. It's about being timeless. And what struck me was one of the cashiers said to me, I look forward to when you are going to update us, because I felt like I knew what was happening at the university, because now I'm not in my normal space at university. And that was quite an eye-opener for me as well, because we oftentimes forget about those that are not in the academic space, but that are playing quite an enabling role. The last one,
Prof, can we try and wrap up? Thanks.
Yes, no, I've got one point. The last one is about, it's not about you and your personality, but really what's in the best interest of your institution, the staff, and the students, and the broader community. And this was one that really underscored that journey for me. Like Prof. Jansen, I'll deal with his.
Thank you very much, Professor Lawak. We can see convergence here, ladies and gentlemen. Prof. Mwang was talking about the privilege that she felt, and the awareness of self and her position. And Prof. Lawak is talking about the institutional inequalities. So the inequalities is showing itself in various ways, which have got an impact in how teaching and learning occurs within universities. And Prof. Mwang spoke about the issue of realizing that we are all human, or humanity. And Prof. Lawak was talking about staff and student-centered decision-making, which assisted a lot in getting them a reality about what was happening. They both spoke about how key communication is, discussion, and decision-making, which is based on consultative kind of measures. And one was speaking about the need for implementation in such a way that still you are agile within that and you are flexible And the other one was talking about being part of this rhythm, being here, being there. That is all about reading the mood and also reading the situation and being prepared to change. So one can see all these elements within leadership panning themselves in the presentations and in the stories that they are telling. The issue of being reflective is another one which has been highlighted by both professors. We'll move on to Prof. Jansen while he's still busy drafting his notes. Thanks.
No, I wasn't drafting my notes. My notes were made last night, in fact. I just, yeah. So I think the second part, again, in response to the second question, let me just read it for those who don't know, is to talk about leadership journeys in terms of highlights, lowlights, etc., issues, challenges, blah, blah, blah. So I think the most important thing I want to share, just having been a professor, HOD, a dean, a vice-chancellor, an administrator, and all of those things, is perhaps to just share in the context of the earlier discussion 5 important lessons that I've learned that I would share with any, you know, academic leader at any level of a university. The one thing is, the first important lesson that I've learned is that you have much less power than you think. You might think as a vice-chancellor or a dean, you're all powerful, but you learn very quickly that you actually don't have. Now, this is not original. I mean, this was, you know, discovered by organizational theorists like Jim March a while back, but it's actually quite interesting to experience this directly. So let me just give you an example of that. Imagine you're on a university with a very strong sense of its Dutch Calvinist, you know, theology, and you say to your colleagues, I want you to build a Muslim prayer room on this campus. I discovered, I mean, at first you get frustrated and then you're absolutely intrigued intellectually that they can slow walk that thing to death. And you'll never see a Muslim prayer room, not because you don't have power, but because of the ways in which universities can undermine even the most self-confident leader. The second thing I discovered, an important lesson, you are only as good as your second tier. That is your senior team. You fool yourself if you, as an egocentric vice-chancellor, actually think, or dean or head of department, that the university is you. You are not the university. You come and you go. And you are only as good as the quality of your team members. And so I was very good, I knew, in managing the academic project of the university, but I needed a whole lot more people who understood accreditation, who understood complex HR systems, who understood, you know, third stream income possibilities. You're only as good as your team. That's why you must respect them. That's why you must nurture them. That's why you must love them, because without them, you're actually not going to get very far, as some of our colleagues around the country are discovering. Number 3, your most powerful influence over the academic community is the power of your personal example as a scholar leader. You cannot lead by management fiat alone. Then you're something else. Your example, I could stand in a Senate and say, I'd like to see research quality improve to all my professors, but I can only do that credibly if I am active, both in teaching first-year students, which I did, and in producing quality research, which I hope to do. Number 4, you have a powerful platform as a vice-chancellor for communicating academic, or a dean, or a HOD, for communicating academic and human values. And as I said to my colleagues here at Stellenbosch University, I've heard you talk about everything from climate change to big data to the oceans. I've not once heard you use the platform of orientation, of graduation, of alumni, meets, of welcoming ceremonies to talk about racism, which is such a crucial issue in or xenophobia for that matter, in all of our universities. Don't underestimate that platform that you have, not just to speak about the nuts and bolts of accreditation or of performance management and so on and so forth. Of course, those things must be done, but to also see your role as a leader to speak more broadly to issues percolating in a very troubled society and on our troubled campuses. And then number 5, and finally, your temperament as a leader is the single most important asset in your leadership knapsack or backpack. A leader without control over their emotions is a danger to themselves and others. For example, being criticized by academics is part and parcel of university life. And if you don't understand that, you shouldn't work at a university. You should work at a corporate or something. But your temperament as a leader can destroy your academic unit. Again, be that a department, a faculty, a school, or a whole university. Those are probably the 5 most important things I've learned about being a leader. It's a humbling experience being a leader. It's amazing how often you are found out to be wrong, but it is a wonderful opportunity to grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jansen, for those words. I do think that this area of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, of hopelessness, not only within South Africa, I do believe that globally, you know, after COVID, with the economic situations in the world generally, which has got an impact both in our own economy together with our fiscus, which then negatively impacts on higher education, is a big thing. Now, to create hope among the people within this context or within this environment is an area that I find very, very fascinating. The issue of exemplary leadership has been mentioned by both you and Professor Rensburg, because when he was asked about the legacy he would like to leave, he mentioned this aspect of exemplary leadership. So I do think that it's an area which we need to develop further as part of leadership which would be responsive to the kind of context that we're talking about. In your case, you're talking about exemplary leadership within the context of being an academic and also addressing the challenges that we experience both locally and globally. And in his presentation, he mentioned it within the context of driving the transformation agenda, which I think is quite powerful. The other aspect where you have come to the same element is that one of temperament as a leader. He also mentioned the same. I can't even remember the words that he used, but he was saying that you have to be very, very measured as a leader, because within the turmoil, within the challenging circumstances, it's very important that you control yourself as a leader and you lead within that context of flux of change, that context of uncertainty, of hopelessness, and you drive people towards a particular direction. So, colleagues, we are left with almost, okay, on that note then, I think I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panel within the closing session for their various presentations or their various stories. They were quite insightful, they were quite influential, and they were quite uplifting to us, giving us hope in a context of hopelessness. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to you, Dr. Sim.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matutu, and I thank you very much for our esteemed panelists on this very interesting session, Professor Jansen, Professor Lewak, and Dr. Mueng. Colleagues, I know it's been a long day for those of you in the US. You're just starting out. For those of us here in the South, it's coming to the end of the day. So I'd like to ask Professor Rensburg just to wrap up the session for us for today. And of course, we look forward to seeing you all online again tomorrow when we start again just after 1 p.m. South African time. We encourage you to please join us then. There's some really exciting sessions that we've planned, some very exciting parallel sessions. So with that, let me thank our panelists once again for their time and their inputs. And I'd like to hand over to Professor Rensburg just to wrap us up for the day. Professor Rensburg, thank you.
Thanks very much, Oliver. I just want to join you in expressing sincere appreciation to Vivian, Mookie, and Jonathan. I thought that this was a very powerful session in which we were able to learn from distinguished leaders some important insights, and I think it's a very important methodology for learning. That is for us on the receiving end of that conversation, for learning and for self-development and growth. So I just also want to really express appreciation to the colleagues for sharing their stories so generously with us this afternoon. Siyabonga kakhulu, thank you very much. So colleagues, we've really had a fine day. But of course, it's in your hands to when you do the assessments and you give us the feedback. But I thought that we started off our 3-day engagement exceptionally well, beginning with a macro picture, learning from our colleagues in the Department of Higher Education, Dr. Marsia Socikwa, learning from her about how she and the department, the DG and the minister, see the global setting within which universities find themselves, and shared with us the importance of the work that we're undertaking here within HELM, and in particular in our current leadership summit. We then had important insights from a panel comprising of Professor Muthwa, Bawa, Hoppers, de Wit, and Dr. Ipe, who gave us global insights and the implications for current higher education. And I think we have an excellent summary also that we that we communicated, and we will include that summary also in the conference proceedings. This afternoon, we also then had a session led by Dr. Stefanko, exploring in a leadership conversation circle and with a leadership conversation circle, the global and national implications. So what does this practically mean for our universities and how we lead our universities? And we've concluded with some leadership insights, leadership stories into the practical dimensions of nurturing teams and of leading in a transformational manner. And so the key words for me as we close out are about vulnerability and distress. We're in a period of acute vulnerability, an extraordinary distress experienced in a context in which there is a growing pull towards a potential next Cold War. with all of the risks associated with that. We heard colleagues asking us questions about vulnerability and freedom of speech, and the roles of vice-chancellors, executive deans, and other university leaders in respect of creating safe spaces for them to undertake their work. So vulnerability and distress on the rise still. Adaptation, we have learned in particular in the last session, but also the middle session, about the importance of adaptation, of learning, of unlearning, of trial and error, of the importance of making decisions to change course if needs be. So adaptation, another key word certainly for me. Next key word, learning and growing. I think I've implicitly spoken about this already. I'm not going to take much more of our time. And the last keyword for me is about modeling leadership behavior. I spoke earlier about transformational leadership in particular. Professor Janssen spoke about this subject as well. And so as we close out, I hope that this has been a helpful introduction and lead up into, excuse me, Middle Day 2, which commences tomorrow at 1300 hours South African time, very early in the US. That's 6 hours on the East Coast earlier at 7 a.m. And if you're on the West Coast, it's 5 a.m. And so on. So we commence then tomorrow, and we kick off with concurrent sessions. I draw your attention to the program again, showcasing issues in leadership development, reimagining leadership post-COVID, and student success. So we kick off with that. We follow up with a concurrent session on the hotspots of leadership, on mental health and self-care in the academe, and on enabling institutional cultures, before we close out with a plenary session in which we examine the topic of leading the middle, global perspectives on the role of the Dean. So colleagues, wish you a wonderful day further, and we look forward to being in your company again tomorrow. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.